Hello, my dearest comrades. I hope you are all doing well. Kissinger is dead. Dead. Humanity's wishes have been answered. Decades late, but they've been answered. All that comes to be, as Goethe once said, deserves to perish wretchedly. And perish wretchedly, Kissinger did. Someone almost universally hated by most of the world. So we'll discuss that today. We'll be discussing the Israel's Hannibal Directive, and other stories out of Israel and Palestine. We'll be reacting to some videos in that area, and we'll also discuss a billionaire that owns basically all of the water in California. So we'll get started with all that right after this.
Injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All right. What's up, comrades? How's everyone doing tonight? The bozo is dead. Yes. Everyone grab the bottle, celebrate, pop some champagne. Rest in piss, Henry. Absolutely. Um, Shame he lived so long. Yeah. I don't believe in God, but if I did, I think it'd be some cruel joke for assholes, enemies of humanity, like Kissinger, to live up to 100, and then for heroes of humanity, revolutionaries of various sorts, whether it's the figure of Che Guevara or Christopher Caldwell or others that were taken well before their time. Lenin petting the cat is quite based, absolutely. Um, as you all know, Kissinger's dead at 100 years. He died, unfortunately, in peace. He was able to experience longevity, which, as Dr. King teaches us, is not everything is in life, but it does have its values. Longevity does have its values. But this was a man who committed atrocious crimes, who was a centerpiece agent of some of the most destructive and murderous imperialist campaigns of the last 70 or so years. Someone who was involved in the occupation and the bombing of Vietnam, where tons and tons of Agent Orange and napalm were dropped on the Vietnamese people. Someone who was involved in the campaign to overthrow the Christian socialist government of Salvador Allende in Chile. Someone who destroyed Cambodia. There's that famous quote from Anthony Bourdain that if he ever saw Kissinger, he would beat him up because of what he's seen of his policies in Cambodia. Dictatorships in Argentina that killed hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps of communists and young revolutionaries. And as someone who just got the opportunity to spend some time with one of these Argentinian communist revolutionaries, Beatriz Ragland, a seasoned 85-year-old communist, I had the opportunity to hang out with her while I was in Mexico City, and she performed a theatrical performance of her life, the 4 times that she's been arrested. And it ends with her talking about a list that is published of all the people that were missing and presumably killed by the Argentinian dictatorships. And she found one of her good friends and the boyfriend of one of her good friends. And it was an extremely emotional ending to the play that she had done. And most of the people in the crowd, who were also communist revolutionaries of various sorts, were brought to tears by it. But these activities, murderous activities, fascistic activities, were propped up by people like Kissinger. And then, as if as if irony couldn't be any greater, he gets awarded in 1973 the Nobel Peace Prize. A war criminal awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Does it sound familiar? It should, because Obama, who's another war criminal, perhaps as big of a war criminal, was also awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. And that's what that has a lot to say about these bourgeois institutions, and what they actually think of peace. When war criminals, despised by the vast majority of humanity, are given Nobel Peace Prizes, what the hell does the Nobel Peace Prize actually stand for? So let's look at some videos. One of them is from Breakthrough News, which is articulating some of the biggest crimes of Henry Kissinger's long career. And this is someone who, regardless of everything he's done, not only does he get to live a life of longevity and die in peace at the seasoned age of 100, but he lives well. He lives well. He lives lavishly. He's a part of the elite. And this is what capitalism rewards. It produces these sorts of people, and then it rewards them. If you're a clever opportunist who's willing to step on humanity, kill whoever you have to kill, bomb whoever you have to bomb, if you're willing to do all of that in order to achieve the bottom line of capitalism, profit for the capitalist, the accumulation of capital for the richest of the rich, if you're willing to do that and you're good at it, you will be rewarded. It's a system that rewards the most anti-human people possible. It's a system of death. It's a cancerous system. And those who are the best at proliferating the influence of this system around the world are rewarded, as Kissinger is, a life of lavish that comes to its end at the seasoned age of 100. God knowing how many times he had health issues and was able to get treated because, one, he had insurance as someone that worked for the government, and two, he had money. So he had the best medical treatment. That's something that the vast majority of Americans don't have, 60,000 of whom die every year from preventable things that are actually rooted in the fact that they either didn't have insurance or were underinsured and didn't want to take up the debt and what that signifies as a form of crippling enslavement for the rest of their lives. So let's watch this video from Breakthrough News. They preface it by saying former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has died at 100. As the media prepares to sanitize his legacy, they're already doing that. History will not forget his true record of bloodshed and war crimes in the service of empire. So let's give this short video a watch.
Henry Kissinger is somehow still alive, and in his lifetime, he's been responsible for some of the worst atrocities in the history of the world. As he turns 100 on Saturday, we wanted to recap just a few of the war crimes that stand as his true legacy. Under Nixon, Kissinger oversaw the massacre of millions in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos from 1969 to 1973. He was the mastermind behind the carpet bombing of Cambodia, which deliberately targeted civilians, personally approving all 3,875 bombing raids in Cambodia. And to this day, Laos remains the most bombed country in world history. In Chile, Kissinger played a key role in orchestrating the US-backed 1973 coup that...
And Laos is one, we hear a lot about Vietnam, but we never hear about Laos. And the amount of bombs we dropped on Laos, the amount of people we killed, were up there with Vietnam, just like in other places that, the U.S. has killed millions of people, Indonesia and other places where the campaigns, the murderous campaigns, were horrendous in a so-called Cold War, which was anything but cold. But that to this day, they compose histories of the crimes of empire that the vast majority of people are not aware of. That the empire hid a lot better than it hid some of its other crimes, like Vietnam.
That toppled the socialist government of Salvador Allende and installed the fascist Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet's brutal regime murdered thousands and subjected tens of thousands more to torture during his 16-year reign. Kissinger aided the Pakistani dictator Yahya Khan against Bangladesh's liberation war of 1971, enabling the mass slaughter of an estimated 300,000 to 3 million people. Kissinger authorized and armed Suharto, the Indonesian dictator, in his genocidal invasion of East Timor in 1975. This campaign led to the death of over 200,000 Timorese through massacres and forced starvation. In 1976, Kissinger gave his pre-approval to Argentina's right-wing military junta for their dirty war against leftists, resulting in the brutal murder, torture, and disappearance of over 30,000 people. This is only a glimpse into the extensive list of Kissinger's crimes, and new things are still being revealed every year. While Kissinger continues to be honored and held in high regard by the mainstream political establishment, it's clear that he should rightfully be remembered as one of the biggest mass murderers in history.
There you go. Beautifully said by the comrades from Breakthrough News. I'm going to post the link in the chat because I see some people are interested in where this coverage is coming from. Future Homestead says, if Kissinger is trending on Twitter, there must be many anti-war / anti-imperialists in the U.S. Yeah, I mean, he could also be trending from people doing some ass-kissing and some boot-licking on his legacy, but it depends on what the hashtag is. I haven't seen it yet, but yeah, I think the vast majority of the American people have an anti-war sentiment, and when the truth is revealed to them in hindsight, they come to see things clearly and see who was very clearly on the side of evil, of empire, and who was on the side of humanity. That's why they have to lie to us. You know, if we were naturally predisposed to want war and to, just mow the lawn, as Israel phrases it, of other people and their countries, they wouldn't have to lie to us so much. They wouldn't have to spend the immense amount of resources that they do in upholding these ideological institutions that are what get us to consent to the activities that they do. So the fact that they spend so many resources trying to convince us, should tell us something, one, about our potential and what the ruling class thinks our potential is. But it should also let us know that if it wasn't for these manipulations and these lies, the vast majority of people likely wouldn't be buying into the things that U.S. imperialism does. The next video I wanted to show on the subject of Kissinger is from the legendary Michael Parenti, and the legendary clip from Michael Parenti, the yellow Parenti. So let's give this one a watch. I think he fleshes out here some of the points that I was trying to make earlier concerning who is rewarded in capitalism, what sort of figures are rewarded, and why are they rewarded? Whose interests do they have to represent in order to be rewarded?
Why don't we take the road of the Henry Kissingers and the Daniel Patrick Moynihan and the Ziggy Brzezinskis and the Eugene Rostows and the McGeorge Bundys, who toadied up and mouthed for power. When Henry Kissinger was made National Security Advisor for Richard Nixon, Nelson Rockefeller gave him $50,000. That's a going-away present. As Nelson Rockefeller testified himself before the Senate committee when he was being appointed Vice President of the United States. And they asked, and the senators, well, they really went at Rockefeller really hard. They said, why did you do that, Mr. Rockefeller? And Rockefeller said, well, giving's always been a tradition in our family. Giving. They cast their bread upon the water, then more and more came back, didn't it? He was saying to Henry Kissinger, Henry, I brought you out of Harvard. I brought you out of that Center for, or whatever that was, strategic studies, because I like the books you were writing, and you're writing them for me. Henry, you remember, you're going to go work for Tricky Dick, but you remember who you belong to. And that's what hungering for power is. It's climbing, like the political climbers and careers have done in every country in the world. And we on the left don't do that. We stand out in the rain. We stand out on the picket line. We put our jobs on the line. We risk our careers. In many cases, we even risk our physical safety and our lives in all sorts of countries. If it's power we want, why do we take such a circuitous route?
Beautifully said. uh, in words hardly better, words that hardly anyone can find a better replacement, as is usual with Parenti, so concise and so precise. And it's absolutely true. You know, you hear this dogma that these communists are just out for power. They're just out for power. Yeah, we're out for power, but a specific type of power. We're out for power in a society where it's the people who have a say. That's the type of power that we're out for. We're not just power hungry in general. We're not just looking for abstract power. If we wanted abstract power, we would just be fucking sellouts and be ladder climbers, as the vast majority of people in the system are. And one of the other things that Parenti mentions there is that Kissinger, his career in Harvard, and it should help us think. I'm sure most of the people in the audience know this already, but in case you don't, these institutions of so-called higher learning, we have to really question, what is it that they're learning? What is it that they're seeking? Are they institutions of truth seeking? Is that the basis of it? Are they these neutral social institutions that seek truth irrespective of class interest and national interest or whatever? No, absolutely not. It's actually the opposite. These are ideological institutions. They're the embodiments that allow consent to be manufactured. Ideology doesn't exist in like this sort of dead space. Ideology has to be embodied. You know, the way that you can convince people to accept an order that is fundamentally against their objective interest is not through this like transcendental arena where ideas exist. No, it's through the embodiment of these ideas in the institutions that people are socialized through. And at the highest level, you have institutions like Harvard, like Yale, and others, these Ivy League schools, these prestigious schools that are supposed to be at the cutting edge of the various forms of research on truth. And that in reality, all they really are the best ideologues, the most capable people in spinning the narrative of the ruling class in a way that makes it sound appealing to people. They're just ideologues. That's all they are. They're institutions of the ruling class, by the ruling class, and for the ruling class. Sure, here and there are some exceptions, some Marxist professors, people who speak out, but the norm is what we have to look at, not these accidental outliers, but what is the norm? And what you find is that these are institutions that are guided, they're created, their whole purpose is to allow for the smooth reproduction of the existing order by focusing on the realm of ideas and making the ruling ideas as coherent as possible so that they can then be trickled down to the rest of society and accepted by people whose objective conditions as a working class are not in line with an order that produces these ideas. Okay. Hi, Carlos. I'm glad you're live. Thank you. This is, I think, perhaps the first live I've done alone in a long time. I miss the conversation. I like having someone to look at. That's why I hated teaching so much when we were online. You know, there's a lot of people that didn't have the cameras on, especially the first semester. I didn't mention in the syllabus that that it was mandatory for people to have their cameras on. And once you start a semester and you don't have a specific policy, it's hard to implement new policies halfway through. So it's something I learned, and the 2 other semesters I think that I had to teach online, I made it mandatory for people to have their face on the screen. It's hard to do this, but we must do it. We must speak about the news and react to important videos and do what the Institute sets itself out to do. So that's all things Kissinger. The next story I wanted to cover was on the Hannibal Directive, and it's going to take the form of the conversation that Max Blumenthal, who we should have on the show in a few days, the conversation he had with Chris Hedges. So let's give that a watch.
With them. There is growing evidence that in the chaotic fighting that took place once Hamas militants entered Israel on October 7th, the Israeli military decided to target not only Hamas fighters, but the Israeli captives with them. Tuval Escapa, a member of the security team for Kibbutz Beria, told the Israeli press he set up a hotline to coordinate between kibbutz residents and the Israeli army. Escapa told the Israeli newspaper Aretz that as desperation began to set in, quote, the commanders in the field made difficult decisions, including shelling houses on their occupants in order to eliminate the terrorists along with the hostages. The newspaper reported that Israeli commanders were, quote, compelled to request an aerial strike against its own facility inside the Erez crossing to Gaza in order to repulse the terrorists who had seized control. That base housed Israeli civil administration officers and soldiers. Israel in 1986 instituted a military policy called the Hannibal Directive, apparently named for the Carthaginian general who poisoned himself rather than be captured by the Romans, following the capture of 2 Israeli soldiers by Hezbollah. The directive is designed to prevent Israeli troops from falling into enemy hands through the maximum use of force, even at the cost of killing the captured soldiers and civilians. The directive was executed during the 2014 Israeli assault on Gaza, known as Operation Protective Edge. Hamas fighters on August 1st, 2014 captured an Israeli soldier, Lieutenant Hadar Golden. In response, Israel dropped more than 2,000 bombs, missiles, and shells on the area where he was being held. Golden was killed, along with over 100 Palestinian civilians. The directive was supposedly rescinded in 2016. Joining me to discuss the reports of Israel shelling its own citizens with tanks and missiles is Max Blumenthal, who investigated this for the Gray Zone. So you did a wonderful job piecing together these reports that are coming out of Israel. Why don't you just lay out what Israeli commanders faced after roughly 10 hours, several hours after this incursion, and then, of course, perhaps give me some details about what you found out.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'm still trying to piece together what happened on October 7th. And one reason that I'm sort of left investigating even after this report that I thought was comprehensive was that in the face of so much death and destruction caused by Israel's military in Gaza, which is basically tantamount to genocide. I mean, you have systematic killing in Gaza. Everyone I know there has, luckily, I don't know anyone who's been killed, but everyone I know there has lost neighbors or relatives. They've all lost their homes. And so the Israeli military and the prime minister's office, Netanyahu's office, are recycling October 7th atrocities. And they're also introducing new deceptions in order to try to keep the media's lens focused on October 7th now that it is starting to home in on the horror of Gaza. And we have all these new stories about babies baked in ovens. We've heard stories about babies cut out of mothers' wombs by so-called Hamas terrorists, rape, gang rape, women after being taken captive, gang raped in the streets in Gaza City. All of these lies were spun out. And of course, the 40 beheaded babies repeated by Biden, who claimed he'd seen photographs. All of these lies were repeated and put forward in order to give Israel the latitude to carry out this genocidal assault that we're now witnessing. And we can see Biden was so stunned by the propaganda that was being pushed on him by Netanyahu's office and the pro-Israel media that he immediately caved. And Tony Blinken, in his recent Senate testimony, also repeated some of these lies. So I'm still trying to unpack it because it's these lies that went beyond the actual killings and atrocities that were committed by gunmen from the Gaza Strip on October 7th that have made it possible for Israel to target and exterminate hundreds of entire families in the Gaza Strip, as well as hospitals and medical centers. So that I started my investigation when testimony started to filter out in Israeli media, which contravened the official story of October 7th. And the official story, which has been told to Americans and Israelis, is that Hamas, quote unquote, terrorists stormed into southern Israel and began just shooting and killing people at random, then burned them alive, tied up entire families in their homes, and then burned them all somehow, melted cars and burned people in their cars as they were trying to flee, and carried out this gigantic mass shooting. And it does appear clear that many non-combatants, Israeli non-combatants, were shot by Hamas gunmen, but that's kind of where the official story stops. And what I was able to determine from these testimonies, as well as just a basic and visual analysis of the photos that the Israeli Foreign Ministry and Prime Minister office were putting forward was that Israel used disproportionate force on its own citizens in order to dislodge a politically driven military offensive by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which was aimed at extracting political concessions from the state of Israel, which had been besieging the Gaza Strip for 15 years. So you read one of those testimonies, and I guess we can go into some detail about them and how I came to my conclusions.
Yeah, let's go.
Oh, I was muted. It's a systematic policy, the Hannibal Directive, that if Israeli soldiers, armed forces, are trapped by the enemy, they will bomb and do whatever they have to do, even if it kills, or specifically if it kills their own soldiers, in order to get rid of the so-called enemy. But the policy, the Hannibal Directive, as Hedges had explained, and I don't think Blumenthal has yet to explain, but the Hannibal Directive is supposed to be specific to soldiers. And it seems like what they have done since October 7th, where it has been shown with great clarity that it was Israel, Israeli tanks and helicopters that killed a lot of the civilians that were killed in Hamas. Some of the scorched bodies, Hamas doesn't even have the weaponry to produce those sorts of effects. It's Israel that does. And footages have came out showing that it does. What it seems to have happened is that the sort of group that's considered acceptable to be killed in order to get the enemy has been expanded from just soldiers to civilians. And effectively what that means is that Israel has okayed the killing of their own people in order to get to what they call Hamas, which are really just Palestinian resistance forces, the resistance forces that the Palestinian people have chosen after 7 decades of occupation. So that's stomach turning, and it's not something that's new from imperialist forces. And of course, all that Israel really is, it's a neo-colonial outpost. Well, neo-colonial and colonial, because it's got some of the old school settler colonialism with it, of course. All Israel really is, it's the U.S.'s colonial outpost in the Middle East. So it follows some of the trends that we've seen before. And you have Operation Northwood in the U.S. that was never executed, thanks to JFK, who decided not to do it. But Operation Northwood was supposed to be a campaign of terror attacks that would be done in Miami, in Tampa, in Washington, D.C., and in other places in order to increase the hysteria against Cuba, which was the country that we would blame these self-inflicted terror attacks on, and to then legitimize consent on the basis of that popular fear for interventions in Cuba. It never happened, again, thanks to JFK, who pulled the plug, and who said at the end of his life that two of the people whom he most feared within the U.S. were the people that are very ideologically guided anti-communist and the Zionists. So it's kind of funny that the person running today, on the basis of the social capital that he inherits for being the nephew of JFK and the son of Bobby Kennedy, it's very interesting that this person is perhaps amongst the most ardently Zionist in this race, which it's all of them are trying to show themselves to be the biggest Zionists. There's like a competition to see who can be more Zionist than the other. It's disgusting. But part of what this extension of the Hannibal Directive from killing just soldiers to killing civilians, part of what it produces is things like this. This was an Israeli child. This is from Rania Kalek, quoting Electronic Intifada. An Israeli child completely incinerated at Kibbutz Be'eri was killed by 2 tank shells shot by Israeli forces at the end of an hours-long gun battle. A survivor of the same carnage told the Israeli state broadcaster Khan earlier this month. And if you read the article, it discusses how it was very clear to the tankers that this girl and her family were still in the house. But it was worth killing their own people, innocent civilians, or in the case of the little girl, like an innocent little girl, it was worth killing her in order to get 1 or 2 people from Hamas. I don't consider that to be very ethical, but it shows that, you know, all of these claims that the Israeli state makes about caring about Jewish people and being the representative of the Jewish people, they don't care. Their bottom line is functioning as what they were created to be, a colonial outpost for the U.S. and the imperialist West in the Middle East. And that's the bottom line. Nothing's getting in the way of the bottom line. Everything else is just, you know, it's a smokescreen. It's something that's used to distract you, to ideologically legitimate the activities that they're doing, whose real drive is always located in political economy. And it's a drive that you can only understand if your framework of understanding the world is rooted in an analysis of political economy and imperialism. So, but that's that. Let me check out the chat, see if there's any new comments. There's a comment here from Caspian. Thank you so much for the comment. Do you anticipate another Red Scare in the upcoming years in the U.S.? What should we do if that happens? That's a very interesting question. I just had an interview with Rick Sanchez in his show Direct Impact, the Spanish version. I spoke with him Monday. And he was asking me something similar, because these campaigns of censorship against students, you know, now they're saying that they're going to be on the lookout for students that are showing solidarity with Palestine on campus and persecute them. And when you look at the demographics and you see that it's like 80-something% of the people that are, you know, supporting a ceasefire and pro-Palestine in general are the younger folks, you know, folks 18 to 35, which is the age of college students. When they say on the one side, we're going to persecute people that are pro-Palestine in colleges, and on the other side, it is a fact that the vast majority of people in those colleges are sympathetic to Palestine and are in favor of ceasefire, what's implied there is a persecution of the vast majority of college students, which is just completely absurd. And that's one of the elements that I think is new in these new campaigns of censorships and attacks. Like, you know, the most active anti-communist campaigns and McCarthyism, it was bad. A lot of people were getting charged, you know, some of whom were communists, and they had the right to be, some of whom weren't, and were falsely charged as communists simply because they were, you know, rational liberals who didn't want to escalate war or the world into a world war. And it was a bad time. You know, we should not minimize that. But what we're setting ourselves up for now is something unlike I think we've ever seen, simply because of this the proportion of the people that are on the side of the opinions that the empire wants censored. Like this specific case of the college students, if the vast majority of college students are sympathetic with Palestine, and the state is going to try their best to combat that sympathy within college, then they're literally going to have to fight against or repress and censor the vast majority of college students. So I think that, yes, the censorship campaigns, the Red Scares, all of that is coming back. It's going to be more intense than ever before. And it's rooted in the fact that the living standards of the American people are shit. As we've talked about many times, we're young folks are the first generation in U.S. history to look forward to living standards that are worse than their parents. So the material incentive that allowed a portion of American working people to turn an eye to what the empire was doing, that material incentive is gone. And it's not only gone in the sort of way that, I don't know, when you lose like 5 pounds, those 5 pounds are gone, and then you can just eat a cheesecake the next day, and then boom, they're back. That's not the form in which this is gone. It's gone for good. Like American capitalism hit its peak capacity, and in the crisis of 1971, it had to financialize. It literally could not keep going in the way that it was going, and capital had to choose when it came time to reinvest that capital, right? Because what distinguishes capital from just things is the fact that there's this telos, this purpose in capital to increasingly accumulate itself. So capital has to be reinvested. The American capitalist, faced with a situation where the rate of profit was miserably low for productive industries, had to decide, well, what do I reinvest this capital in? There was two main routes. Continue with productive industries, but do it elsewhere, China, Mexico, and other parts of the world, Thailand, where you can have cheaper factories, super exploited laborers, that makes it worth it to continue being an industrial capitalist of sorts, or go the route of financialization, which is an even more parasitical form of capitalism where profits are derived from stock buybacks, rents, and interest, instead of being that sort of basic formula of MCM prime, money, commodity, and of course there's a bunch of other letters there. But start with money, finish with money prime, and there's a bunch of stuff in the middle where the surplus value is created that allows you to get the M prime at the end. What these forms of more parasitic capital are is that transition directly from money to money prime, from money to more money. It's usury. That's a form of usury, different forms of usury, and it's something that has been condemned by virtually every religion in the history of humanity. And this development of capital is a structural necessity for a moribund capitalism, and that's why the conditions that our people are in are not improvable. They're only going to be more intensified, and the only way to actually improve the condition of our people is if we completely restructure our society, our power relations, what classes in power, our institutions, and all of that. But within the confines of capitalism, we cannot improve this. So it's a situation that is unprecedented in the U.S., where the material stability that allowed a certain percentage of the people to turn a blind eye to the activities of empire is no longer there and can no longer return, which means that people are only going to continue radicalizing themselves because they see the bombs dropping. And, at one point, it was only the moralists who would see the bombs dropping. They lived fine. And, they took the streets out of this deep sentiment of love for humanity and condemnation of these actions. But now you see the bombs dropping and you don't have enough to pay for the basic necessities at the end of the month. Your infrastructure in your community is destroyed. Most of the small businesses were forced to close. So you make that connection, as Parenti would label it, the connection of the empire bleeding out the republic. And that radicalizes people. And if that condition that leads to them, the material conditions that lead to that ideological phenomenon in the populace, is unchangeable, if it can only be intensified, it's a very difficult situation that our ruling class is in. So, yeah, absolutely. We're going to have a very scary Red Scare, but I cannot see the ruling class getting out of this one very easily. You know what? Their temporary solution, their temporary extension, would have been Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders was the one candidate that had the capacity, as FDR did, with the Great Depression, of giving capitalism a life boost, of allowing the contradictions to control themselves for a bit and prevent them from becoming antagonistic, at least for another decade or two. But they didn't even want Bernie Sanders to win. They're so stupid that they didn't realize that what could have saved them for some decades down the line, they destroyed. So that's, I think, in my view, where we're at, and why the Red Scare campaign is novel in comparison to the ones that we've seen from the past, in the past. Okay. All right. So let's go to our next story. Let me just mark off that we did the kibbutz one. Let's put this one. This is a clip from a podcast that comedian Theo Vaughn did with a little bit of a loose, lighthearted segment, but I think important to discuss with I think it's Stavy, who I'm not sure of the name of the other comedian, but I think it'd be interesting to analyze some of the things that are being said here.
That's the same thing. I think that's like, people, you see like the you always hear like the Free Palestine movement, and for me, it's like, if a place, when you hear the free thing, like free, that place usually needs help, right?
Yeah.
That's
a
the
good
place
rule of
that
thumb.
needs. It's like, you don't hear free America,
Right,
you don't hear free Israel, you don't hear
free China.
you don't hear
China's
free
good.
South Carolina.
Yeah,
Yeah. You don't hear free Nevada.
No,
you hear,
yeah.
You hear free Palestine. Shit's heartbreaking over there.
Without question, yeah.
And our news doesn't even cover.
That's such a like common sense approach to it. It's such a common sense. It's like there was a video that I think we reacted to a while back. If what you're seeing when you go on like Snapchat and you pull up videos from Gaza is like people showing the rubble all around them, or dead babies and dead people and corpses all over the place, and then you put the Snapchat thing on Tel Aviv or other Israeli cities, and you see people partying, it becomes pretty clear, which side is doing the oppressing, which side is doing the occupying, and which side is trying to fight back against that, and is actually attempting to defend themselves from 75 years of brutal occupation and apartheid. And it's the same thing here, like free Palestine. What that gives you the answer to the question that most people ask themselves on October 7th, which is, why did this happen? That's why, every Zionist wants to start the conversation on October 7th. They never allow you to contextualize it. And if you try to, they're always going to go back to October 7th. They try to always divorce the fact from the factors that allowed that fact to be a fact. But most people who are not that ideologically driven to defend Israel naturally will ask the question, why would something like this happen? And sure, maybe a lot of them won't get to the point where they see Hamas as the natural resistance of the Palestinian people that, you can't sit here and condemn on your, chair of righteousness, but a lot of them will begin to challenge the narrative on Israel and begin to question things like Theo is doing here. And this is someone reaching tens of millions of people. So
Cover it fairly either.
No, it's absolutely not at all. I mean, no one is for terror, and it's like when you point out that the people in Gaza have been under military occupation with like not.
You mean oppressed people don't have raves next to a concentration camp? Yeah, not usually. You didn't see the Algerians doing raves next to concentration camps.
Access to water, like they have like a ton of crazy shit. And we're not even getting into what's happened now, which is like they're killing so many civilians, it's fucking out of control. It's insane. And it's like the responses, I mean, it's like a moral crime what's happening. But we've ignored the context of that situation, which is like, yeah, dude, these, like, think about exactly what you said. It's like, think about what would happen if Americans were put under that. That's the whole point, right? Of like, I mean, especially if you're like a second, like the guys who always talk about.
That's such an important question to ask. Like, if people came here, started taking your land, discriminating against you because you're not part of the ethnicity or nationality that they consider to be the chosen ones of God, the people that are ontologically superior to everyone else. And that's, if you want to get to the core of it, that's what racism is. If you go back to MLK's speeches, he says, he has a phrase where he prefaces it by saying, excuse me for getting too philosophical, but the essence of racism is the consideration that a people is inferior than another on an ontological basis, on the basis of their very being, not because of their environment, not because of culture, on the basis of their very being. And that's the foundation of the ideological foundation that legitimates the Israeli colonial capitalist project. The idea that the Jewish people are a chosen people, and you have the ontological implication that they're superior to everyone else, and that everyone else is inferior. That's racism. I mean, there's really no way around it. Jake Scott says Theo Vaughn is such a good touch point for some people coming into class consciousness sometimes. Absolutely, he's got that one clip challenging, some of the bullshit like middle class radicalism, where it's not a clip, it's a stand-up where he has a joke where he talks to his black friend, and he's like, the black friend says something about you took everything from me, you stole from me, or something, and he says, you think I would do that to you and move next door? And I'm doing 3 tank tops in the winter, and it's a good ground for solidarity across different racial parts of the working class.
I have a gun in case the government were to fucking, like, that's happening to those people.
Right.
They have no right. Like they're like, it's crazy the situation over there.
And what I was going to say here, it's like, if you pitch it in like the American context, like, what if they did this to you? What do you think would happen if something akin to what's been done to the Palestinian people happened here? A lot of the same people who might today be fooled into calling Hamas terrorist and standing with Israel, perhaps would be the first ones grabbing arms to fight back. So
right now it's like hospitals are getting bombed. It's like,
and if your army is such a talented army as Israel has, right? Yeah. Why don't they send people in, especially if you already control the.
From what I've been able to read, Israel did not help create Hamas. What Israel did was fight against the other forces to the point where the most viable alternative that the people saw was Hamas. So if you want to think about that in terms of Israel created Hamas, you could definitely say that Israel played a role in Hamas being the resistance that the Palestinian people, or at least in Gaza, were left to support, as opposed to other alternatives, or because of the battles that Israel waged upon the other alternatives. But it's not fair to say that Israel created Hamas in the same way that, like, the U.S. created the Mujahideen or something. That's, I believe, incorrect to say.
Area. I mean, you're telling me you can't, I would rather have our Navy SEALs go in
yeah, absolutely,
and do the job in an effective manner, efficient.
I know. There's no way. That's the thing. It's
against there it gets stupid. There the conversation takes a left turn, but still the sentiment is pretty rational, which is that even if you assume all these things to be true, which at this point you really shouldn't. The Israeli propaganda is amongst the worst humanity has ever seen. But even if you assume this to be true, it's a rational and proportional retaliation what they're doing. And I don't think any rational person would come to the conclusion that it is. So remember, this is something that we have to repeat all the time. But we're engaged in two races. The first race is for a ceasefire to stop the ongoing genocide of the people of Gaza. And then the second race is the longer race, the anti-colonial struggle against the apartheid state of Israel and for the establishment of a secular state where Palestinian Jews and Christians and Muslims can live together in peace, as was the case before. So that's Theo Vaughn and Stavy, I believe is his name. My apologies if I'm getting that wrong. Someone mentioned that Stavy was a SOCDEM, likely. I'm not sure. The next story I want to cover is a series of Israeli protesters chanting a Nazi slogan. At least that's how it is being described. Let me show you the footage and then break that down a little bit.
Judenrat, that is literally a Nazi saying. We've now got people shouting Judenrat. The cops are doing absolutely nothing, despite this man here literally saying Judenrat, which this officer should know if they went to school is a word that the literal Nazis used. Yet Zionists say that they're not Nazis. This guy is called Brexit Brian, is a known fascist, friends with Tommy Robinson.
So from what I've been able to read, Judenrat was the German term used to describe the elders or representatives of various Jewish communities that would be in contact with the Nazis and mediate certain forms of dialogue. So my guess here is that they're not using Judenrat as a anti-Semitic slur, but what they're trying to imply is something akin to when Black people call like the Black elite or the Black political class Uncle Tom. It's something akin to that. Like you sold out your people. And in the context of Judenrat, the homologies being drawn here, the comparison, which has been a constant one, is to the Holocaust, which of course is sort of cornerstone, the tragedy that allows, as someone here brilliantly says, quoting the 18th Premier, the tragedy that allows the farce of the state of Israel to construct itself and develop and create itself. So that's the way that I understand it. They're going to continue drawing these connections. They're going to, it's a must for them because no one wants to be called anti-Semitic. No one wants to be placed in the group that the media is saying are the new versions of the Nazis or are anti-Semitic Nazis, and no one wants that. So by making these equations, these comparisons, they make it very difficult to critique Israel. And in connection to that, there was a vote. Let me see if I find the link. There was a vote today casted on whether the critique of Israel should be equated, the critique of Israel and Zionism should be equated with anti-Semitism. And Representative Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, was the only member of the House to vote against the resolution, again, equating criticism of the modern state of Israel with anti-Semitism. So this is an article from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The resolution passed in a vote of 412 to 1, and then 1, as Rashida Tlaib voted present. So she's going to give an interesting response to why she voted present, but you can't be voting present on that. Like, it's very clear. Do you want to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism? If you vote present, then whatever anti-Zionist critiques you've made, whatever criticisms of Israel you've made, you have put yourself in a position where you're unable to affirm whether those criticisms are anti-Semitic or not. It's absurd. Why would you vote present? So again, this is the vacillation of the social democrats that we've talked about from the start. When they do something good, sure, support them, contextualize that support in the fact that they will fuck up again sooner or later, and that they have fucked up, and that they vacillate from sometimes being on the side of working people and the oppressed, and then systematically then flipping on the side to the side of the elite, the capitalists. But this is absurd. So her defense was that let's see where Tlaib said she didn't vote in favor of the resolution because, quote, it ignores the existence of the Palestinian people and brings us no closer to peaceful coexistence. But the resolution states that Jewish people are native to the land of Israel without mentioning the modern state was founded mainly by recently emigrated Jewish Europeans who drove over 700,000 native Palestinian Arabs out of the land in 1948. So shouldn't that be even more reason to vote against it? Shouldn't the fact that the question of whether you want to equate anti-Zionism and critique of Israel with anti-Semitism, couched in to this completely decontextualized and mythological narrative of the state of Israel, shouldn't that be more of a reason to vote against it if there wasn't one already? So again, just the vacillation that we've come to expect from the so-called squad and the American progressive social democratic movement, which is in reality, if you consider progress from the Marxist standpoint, not progressive at all, or not very progressive. Massey, the Republican, explained his opposition in the following manner. He said, I agree with the title, reaffirming the state of Israel's right to exist. and much of the language, but I'm voting no on the resolution because it equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is deplorable, but expanding it to include criticism of Israel is not helpful. That's completely true. And you know what? It should be a fucking embarrassment that the one Palestinian member of the House, of Congress in general, really, wasn't able to vote after, all the work that she's tried to do for a ceasefire, her getting censored, where 22 people from the Democratic Party voted in favor of her censorship. It should be an embarrassment that someone like Massey, a Republican from Kentucky, votes correctly and you don't. You vote present on the basis of an argument that should have made you vote no even harder. So it's almost difficult to believe, but that's the sort of vacillation and inconsistency that we have come to expect from the Social Democrats. Look, I was fooled at the beginning. I given money to the AOC campaign. I supported all of these people. I had high hopes for Bernie when I was a young little Bernie activist, but fool me once, shame on you. But I can't get fooled again. To quote the great comrade George Bush. But once you read the history of the Social Democrats, all the way back to the Second International, once you are able to see the vacillation in front of your eyes for a number of years and draw conclusions from them, and induce various conclusions from them, you realize that these people are not really to be trusted. Sometimes when they wake up on the right side of the bed, they decide to be with the people. Sometimes when they don't, they just reiterate what the elite says, or, as in the case of Tlaib, vote present, try to be neutral on a fucking moving train, as Howard Zinn would say, which is impossible. You can't be neutral on that vote. A vote present is effectively a vote yes. It's the same thing that the AOC did with the Iron Dome vote. Yeah, I didn't vote for it, but what'd you vote? Did you vote against it? Is there really any other option but voting for it or against it here? Absurd, but expected. It was sad. We've been covering the attacks that Rashida Tlaib has faced, and we've condemned those, and we've praised her for the work that she's done, calling for a ceasefire. Her and other progressives from so-called Squad. But that's horrible to see, and again, just it's archetypical of the inconsistencies of these so-called social democrats, democratic socialists. The next video I wanted to show is a clip from Edward Said discussing one of the claims that is central to the Zionist defense of the occupation of the Palestinian people, which is that they were there, and you can prove with the Bible that that land belongs to the Jewish people. Let's look at Said's response. Said is someone whose work is really good when it comes to Palestine. As a philosopher, I disagree with a lot of his other stuff. He pulls a little bit too much from the tradition of postmodernism and Foucault, but nonetheless, he is pretty good in his analysis here. I'm trying to zoom this in. How is it? There we go. There we go. Now we're cooking with gas. Actually, let me make this smaller because I gotta put the volume.
Do the Zionists have any historical claim to the lands of Israel?
Of course, but I would not say that the Jewish claim or the Zionist claim is the only claim or the main claim. I say that it is a claim among many others. Certainly the Arabs have a much greater claim because they have had a longer history of inhabitants, of actual residents in Palestine than the Jews did. And to isolate one of them and say that's the real owner of the land, I mean, that is fundamentalism. And this is very important. I don't think any claim, I don't care whether it's given by God, about whom I have many doubts, by the way, or by the emperor, nobody has a claim that overrides all the others and entitles that person with that so-called claim to drive people out. I mean, that's the point. Very, very important point. I mean, Jews have a claim, and I've never denied that. Of course they do. But is it a claim that can tell a Palestinian, well, you've got to leave this house because I got it 3,000 years ago. I mean, it's true I come from Poland or from Brooklyn, but I have a bigger right to this house than you do. So get out. I'm sorry, I disagree with that kind of logic.
So, Said, do the Zionists have any historical?
It's only the fact that as soon as you question that and how absurd that sounds, like, yeah, I don't care if you and your Palestinian family have been here for the last 12 generations and you can trace it back, and I don't care. There's this text that says that we belong here. So me, who was raised in Brooklyn, whose parents are from Brooklyn, and whose family before that is from Poland or whatever other part of Europe, I'm going to come here, I'm going to take your home because of that. A rational person listens to that and says, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, who thinks like that? That makes no sense. There's been so many skits made, like comedians are, stand-up comedians, especially the younger ones, the people that are just getting started, they're hitting it off with making fun of Zionism because it's absurd. It's almost like an SNL skit. But the way that people listen to that absurdity and don't call it out for what it is, a lot of the times it's just because they're scared to be called anti-Semitic. And that's absurd because there couldn't be a more anti-Semitic project today in terms of the scale that it allows anti-Semitism to be produced than Israel. that wages crimes against humanity and genocides and puts the Star of David on it. What more, what greater force promotes anti-Semitism today, or at least anti-Jewish sentiments, because the Palestinians are Semites, but anti-Jewish sentiments? What greater force promotes that anti-Jewish sentiments and makes Jewish people less safe than Israel, that makes the most horrific crimes we've seen in the 21st century in the names of Jews? It's absurd. It's the clearest case of ideology, of a condition where the material reproduction of that specific state of affairs is dependent on their ability to have the understanding of that state of affairs be turned on its head. It is only when that state of affairs understands itself in a completely topsy-turvy and upside-down manner that the reproduction of it can be legitimized and justified. It's completely absurd. Thank you so much, Comrade Jake Scott, for the 2-month membership. These memberships, as well as the Patreon memberships and these donations are so fundamental for the Institute. We really, literally cannot uphold anywhere near the capacity of operations that we have without the financial support that you all give to the Institute. And it's, we tremendously appreciate it. We don't have a socialist state funding our educational project. It's all grassroots funded. So, these donations and memberships are greatly appreciated. Reading Saeed's on the question of Palestine now. Any suggestions for supplemental reading to lend a more dialectical analysis? There's so many. Stuff from Norman Finkelstein. Eddie's been reading Finkelstein's book, Appearance and Reality, and he's told me great things from it. Saeed is good. There's this Israeli historian that I read a while back, Papa, forgetting the first name. Someone could maybe help me out in the chat, but I'm blanking on the name. But there's quite a few people. I think perhaps the best thing you could do right now is join the Educate Against Genocide class that we're doing, that we're extending for another 5 weeks. I see Daniel in the comments. Maybe Daniel can help with some of the information there, but I just wanted to pull this up. We have the class being extended for 5 weeks thanks to popular support. So here you see what are the sort of questions that are going to be addressed, some of the texts that are going to be covered. And it's a great space for people to come together, discuss the sort of mental health issues that they have faced living in a world where there's an ongoing genocide, and your ruling class is the one funding it. It's a good space to talk about how to organize against this genocide, how to organize for a ceasefire. It's a good place to learn. It's also, a class. It's not just a hangout space. It's a class where, we study the history of Zionism, the history of Palestinian resistance. For these next 5 classes, we're going to be looking at the formation of Hamas, amongst other things. So we've also have had guest speakers come on and discuss. We had one of the students of the class, Wissam Khalid. He was actually arrested in Calgary for protesting and chanting "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," a slogan of freedom, of equality, of democracy. An anti-apartheid slogan that has now been twisted into, somehow an anti-Semitic slogan that, implies desiring the death of all Jewish people. It's absurd. But Wissam Khalid gave a class on the origins of Israel, and also discussed some of the repression that he faced over there in Canada. So it's a tremendous space for learning about the history of Palestine, Zionism, Israel. So make sure to check that out. It's $10 entry price. If you can't afford that, contact us and we'll help in any way we can. We don't want anyone missing out on the information just because they don't have $10 to give. But if you do have them, those the Ilan Pape, that's the name I was looking for. If you do have it, it's tremendously appreciated. It's going to causes that are furthering the struggle for a ceasefire for Palestine. So yeah, make sure to check that out. And there's also an option in case you want to donate more. You're capable of doing that. So thank you so much again, Comrade Jake, for the 2-month membership. So what other story do I want to hit now? I'll show this. This is a compilation of Bibi Netanyahu repeatedly requesting U.S. interference in various countries, specifically in the Muslim world. And it shows what Israel has been from the start. Danny Gutierrez says, check out Richard Becker's Palestine, Israel, and the U.S. Empire. Yes. I've talked to Danny about that one. I've heard great things. I haven't read it myself. But this clip shows really what the essence of Zionism has always been. It's always been a colonial outpost of Western, now U.S.-led imperialism. So let's give this a watch.
If you take away the Soviet Union and its chief proxy, the PLO, international terrorism would collapse.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Obviously, we'd like to see a regime change, at least.
Tremendous positive effects on the region. Oh, you mean like the death of millions of innocent people? A war where it's been shown that 90-something% of the people killed were innocent civilians? A war that we had to lie to convince the people to convince the people to let us join. A war that has displaced millions and millions and tens of millions of people. That's the tremendously positive effect that it brought to the region, a country that now is a war-torn country that is just slowly attempting to regain some form of stability and sovereignty, but that was set back because of decades and decades and decades of imperialist attacks and manipulations against the progressive Marxist secular forces. It's absurd.
I would in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how do it...
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The answer is categorically yes. The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. But a third nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya is trying very rapidly to build an atomic bomb capability. So you have here now three nations. All stand together to...
Incredible. It's insane that the U.S. allows its Middle Eastern proxy to behave in these forms. Because the only reason why they hate Trump, it's not because he's actually anti-deep state or going to drain the swamp, but because he's the sort of idiot that says the quiet part out loud, that brings the mask of empire down because of incompetence, whatever might be the case, but that brings the ideological justification for events down and allows the real purpose behind our meddling in various countries' affairs to be shown. And so, as he's done with Venezuela, he's repeated, when I was president, we almost had Venezuela's oil. You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say that we're interfering in Venezuela because it's a dictatorship, a totalitarian government that's repressing human rights and violating human rights and doing all of these horrible things, and therefore we have to intervene. Whilst the reality is always we want to take their oil and overthrow their socialist government so that the resources of the people belong to the capitalists, imperialists, and not to the people. But Trump comes out and says it, and Bibi here is the same thing. Like, he's just calling out for regime change, very explicitly. So,
to stop Iran's march of conquest, subjugation, and terror. I know that no matter on which side of the aisle you sit, you stand with Israel.
there it is. The personification of American imperialism in the Middle East. Thank you so much, QWERTY, for the 14 Canadian dollar super chat. Again, grassroots funded institute. So these donations from the people are tremendously appreciated. I'd love to see a stream dedicated to the Haitian Revolution, considering how violent it was. We know people like Pierce Morgan would be asking if we condemned this for killing the French people at the time. Yeah, no, we actually have quite a bit of content on Haiti. If you just look up Midwestern Marks Haiti, a lot of stuff from Danny, some stuff from Dan Kovalek. But we are slowly posting the on a weekly basis the class that Danny had just finished, Reform or Revolution, that there's going to be a part 2 of. But in that class, he surveys all of the most important historical revolutions. And one of the classes was dedicated to the Haitian 1804 revolution. And he was reading perhaps the most important text to understand that revolution, which is C.L.R. James' book on the Black Jacobins. So that will be posted sometime in the next few weeks. And that's a whole class, 2 hours, some change class dedicated to studying the 1804 Haitian Revolution. So look out for that. And also look out for Danny's Reformer Revolution Part 2, which should be coming out whenever we finish Educate Against Genocide. If it is the case that we finish, we don't know how long it's going to have to last. And insofar as this ongoing genocide continues being ongoing, we're going to continue to educate against genocide and create spaces where people can learn this history and communicate each other, create bonds, and figure out how to work together to change a situation that our government has financed, produced, and equipped. So, ding dong, the bitch is dead. Absolutely, he's dead. Hey, comrade, thank you. Hope you're having a good night as well. Haitian Revolution is so amazing. Read C.L.R. James's book on it. Yeah, Black Jacobin. That's the book. It's Danny read excerpts of it with the class. Okay, let's see what else do I want to do now. This is an older clip of Israelis who were involved in the Nakba process, the catastrophe where 700,000 Palestinians were brutally displaced. 70% of Gaza right now are people who were kicked out of their homes. But here they flaunt the brutality and the inhumanity with which they did all of these acts. And I don't know about you guys, but when I listened to this, it was very reminiscent of one of the greatest forces of evil the 20th century saw, which is Nazism. So let's take a look at what some of these old hags had to say about the formation of the State of Israel and the crimes that it presupposed.
נקיפת מצפון. הרגת, עשית דבר טוב. הייתי מוכן להרוג. אני אספר לה שאני הייתי רוצח. בזמן קרב, אם מישהו הרים ידיים, משהו כזה, לא לקחתי שבויים. כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה? לא, זה לא.
So fucking funny. If in battle people raise their hands, we did not take prisoners. That means we killed people who gave up. We killed people who submitted to us. That's what? A war crime. An internationally recognized war crime. And this fuckface is laughing at that legacy that he participated in.
אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי. הוא תפס אישה, חתיכה צעירה, נכנס...
Look at their fucking faces when they tell these stories. You know, say you participated in any of these horrors. How would you live with yourself? What sort of guilt would you be carrying on a fucking daily basis? How would you sleep if this was something that you were a part of? How would you look at your kids in the face? How would you look at your grandkids in the face if this was what you helped to create? If this was what you did? So the fact that these people are just sitting there and laughing and jokingly telling the story as if they're, you know, talking about that one time that you know, Pepito's fly was down in the middle of the baseball game. They're talking about murdering people in cold blood, people that just gave up. It's horrendous. And listen to what this guy has to say, and then have in mind the shit that the Zionists say now about Hamas. Remember that clip that we reacted to a while back of the Zionist mob screaming horrendous things to Jesus, what's her name? The lady from Code Pink, Medea Benjamin. You know, telling Medea Benjamin that they hope that she gets raped, that it gets recorded, and that they send it to Medea's mother. What? Supposedly, that is what Hamas does. The proof, nowhere to be found. Now listen to what these people are saying, what they did, and tell me who is closer to that image that the Zionists portray of Hamas. Is it Hamas and the Palestinians, or is it they themselves? Is what they're doing projection, as the imperialists always do and are great at? Or is it something that's actually substantiated by the facts, of which there are none? Let's listen to this Soros-looking guy. Exactly what Daniel says here. If Palestinians said shit like this, imagine the performative outrage from the Zionists. It's insane that we can go on our social media and are just bombarded with incredibly racist shit said by the Zionists. And we know that their propaganda forces are working as hard as they can to obtain the dwindling consent to increase the dwindling consent that they still have from the world, which the vast majority of the world is on Palestine's side. If even one Palestinian was caught speaking like this, it would be in the mainstream news cycle 24/7. They would never stop sharing it. It'd be that one piece of evidence that they bring to every debate. Where are those clips? Where are those clips? I'm sorry to quote who I'm about to quote, but you know, Abby Martin just had a really terrific conversation with an unexpected guest, Mia Khalifa, who said something very good, which is that the standard that Israel's held to or the standard that the Palestinians are held to is incredibly high. You know, the Palestinians don't have the luxury to have even a few dumb individuals say dumb things, because that would be plastered all over the news and used to justify the massacre of a whole people. And yet the Israelis can go on screaming all the stupidities and disgusting things that they say, and no one bats an eye.
אחד אנס שם איזה ילדה בת 16, משהו כזה. אתה מבין?
They're fucking laughing. They're laughing about raping a 16-year-old girl. Oh yeah, this is it's disgusting. It's stomach turning.
אבל זה מכוער מאוד, היה לנו בחור אחד, הוא נפטר, הוא היה פרא אדם, הוא לקח פשוט מאוד ורצח אותם בתוך המכלאות. חוטי ברזל כאלה, עגולים כאלה, אספו כל הגברים.
Surrounded by barbed wire. Reminiscent of something?
הם יושבים שם כולם על הרצפה, ובא מישהו ולוקח תת מקלע ומתחיל זה, מחליף מחסנית שלקחו את הלוויורים והפכו אחרי חבר'ה ושרפו אותם. זה היה משהו זוועתי וזה אסור לספר, אני לא אדבר על זה. מלחמה זה מלחמה.
War is war. Laughing while he's saying that they would get people lined up against barbed wire and empty the clips on them and use flamethrowers to burn them. Disgusting. Now, sit here and tell me that the ones that we should be equating with the Nazis are the Palestinians and not these fucking people. As people have been saying in the chat and elsewhere, it's like that quote. First is tragedy, then is farce. It was a tragedy what they did to the Jewish people, what they did to other people as well. So 60 million killed. But it's a complete farce what they're doing here. They don't represent Judaism or the Jews of the world. The vast majority of them are not Zionists and do not support this. What they represent is imperialism. They represent imperialism. That Star of David, when it's waved by that state, does not represent Judaism. It represents imperialism, the interest of imperialism in the region. But I'm sorry, you all, that I put you all through that. I know it's a stomach-turning video, but it's important to show. I should have maybe given out some warnings beforehand. But thank you so much, Comrade Cade, for the $5 super chat. Hello, hey Carlos, wanted to donate because I don't catch your streams often. Also got a date with a girl on Sunday who organized a tenants union and owns Capital Part 1. That's so badass, dude. Thank you so much for the super chat. And yeah, most of my streams are usually with someone else. This is the first one I think I've done in a more than a year alone. And I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed rambling. I'm usually a rambler when I'm in conversations with other people, so I don't know why I was so skeptical to doing this alone, but I got a date with a girl who organized the tenants union and owns Capital Part 1. That's so badass, dude. Yeah, that's so important. The fact that she owns Capital Part 1 too, that's like the basis of her being able to take trade unionism to like socialist class consciousness. So I'd love to see it. Thank you so much. Let me know how that goes, man. That'd be great. I feel like it's hard for people that are dedicated to our lifestyles, that are willing to give their life for this revolution, which doesn't always imply death. It means, various other forms of sacrifice. It's hard to have a partner that's not in the struggle with you, because it's very hard to understand from outside. We seem like lunatics for most regular people. Who would decide to give up job opportunities and better paychecks and time, the few bits of free time that one has to do work like what we do? It doesn't register as something that makes sense for most people. So when finding a partner, I think that as a communist, it would probably be best if it's someone that shares your ideals and life commitments for a truly human world, a world where democracy is actually realized and the people are actually in power. And what we have are not just systems and institutions in place to suck us out of the value that we create with our hands and with nature, and to oppress us if we decide to fight back against our exploitation. As a musician, I totally get it, Carlos. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it'd be cool if you have a partner musician, someone you can jam to or something. Integrity is a foreign concept to most people. Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I think that I've often I think that what ends up happening is that people have an event. And in philosophy, the concept of event, it means something that happens and breaks through the everydayness of your life. So your life has a certain pattern and a certain quotidian character of a certain everydayness, and that's broken through by what in philosophy we call events. You know, there are moments that force you to rethink everything and that create an opening for you to question things that were previously unquestioned. There are openings that allow for new questions to be asked. And you can decide to not ask them and move forward. Or you can decide to be faithful, to have a certain fidelity to the event, and to continue pursuing answers to the questions that the event arose in your minds. I think that's how people get radicalized. Something happens to you at the personal level that forces you to think. And once you reflect, eventually, if you're lucky, you find out that a lot of people have reflected on these issues systematically. And you can then begin to read some literature and eventually you become a Marxist Leninist, a communist, and you dedicate your life to the struggle. But for me, it was my mother having my little sister developing fibromes within her body. The doctor telling her like, "Yo, these can blow up any moment. You need these operated." And what did she do? Did she get the operation? No. She decided that it was better for her to avoid the debt that would put on her family and risk death than get the operation. And the friends that we had and the family members who spent all their time lambasting Cuba, criticizing Cuba, totalitarian, political prisoners, blah, 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 whatever the fuck. They were the first ones to tell my mom, go to Cuba and get the operation. It'll be free there. So I'm going through my everyday life, not reflecting on anything related to politics. And you see this and you're like, what the fuck is going on here? That develops certain questions. And those questions create the conditions for other questions to be developed. So I would go to the beach, because I lived most of my life in South Florida, Hialeah, for those that know. You go to the beach, and what do you see in the beach? You see massive fucking skyscrapers in downtown Miami. And you look down, and it's filled with homeless. And I wasn't too bright at, 9, 10, 11 years old, but I realized that the vast majority of those rooms were unoccupied. And it just wouldn't make sense. Why are there people living in the streets when right fucking next to them, there's empty apartments? That's a question I couldn't answer. I couldn't answer that at 12 years old. I began to answer it with the Bernie movement, where he starts talking about the role of private insurance and profit and all these different things. Eventually, I'm able to study Marxism, and I end up where I am now. But it was my material conditions that led me into that process of questioning that eventually led me to be a communist and to have these hardened principles that function as daily categorical imperatives, as duties that I must do. If not, I can't live with myself. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I wasn't speaking out against the genocide of the Palestinian people. I just couldn't. But I got to this point thanks to an event. And I think because of the changing material conditions in the US, because of the deterioration of the living standard, a lot more people are having those events in their everyday life. That's why the ruling class wants to censor us. That's why the ruling class wants to censor people like us, because we provide the potential for them to answer those questions that arise in those events that occur and break the everydayness of their lives. But enough ranting. Let me go to our next segment. This is, I think it might be the longest one that we have of the day. John Mersheimer recently went on Lex Friedman. Mersheimer is one of those somewhat rational liberals, not a communist, not a socialist, ideologically not aligned with the forces of humanity and the proletariat, but he's someone who has a somewhat pragmatic, commonsensical understanding of things, and that even if his interests lie with imperialism, he's a little smarter than most folks. And we saw this in some of his analysis concerning the proxy war against Russia, and we'll see this now with some of his analysis on the situation in Israel. I might be wrong. I don't know much about him. I might look him up later today and see that he's been calling himself a communist for 20 years or something. I doubt it, but I do think he's one of these positive, rational liberals that we could listen to.
Let me ask you about, you mentioned the Israel lobby. You wrote a book, probably your most controversial book on the topic.
Not probably. Clearly the most controversial book I ever wrote.
So you've criticized Israel.
Hialeah, la ciudad que progresa. Yeah, we used to have so many sayings. Hialeah, agua, fango, y factoría. That's another one. Hialeah, water, mud, and factories. That was like the slogan of the city.
Lobby in the United States for influencing U.S. policy in the Middle East. Can you explain what the Israel lobby is, their influence, and your criticism over the past, let's say, a couple of decades?
Well, the argument that Steve Walt and I made, actually, we wrote an article first, and which appeared in the London Review of Books, and then we wrote the book itself. Our argument is that the lobby is a loose coalition of individuals and organizations that push American policy in a pro-Israel direction. And basically, the lobby is interested in getting getting the United States, and here we're talking mainly about the American government, to support Israel no matter what Israel does. And our argument is that if you look at the relationship between the United States and Israel, it's unprecedented in modern history. This is the closest relationship that you can find between any two countries in recorded history. It's truly amazing the extent to which Israel and the United States are joined at the hip. And we support Israel no matter what, almost all the time. And our argument is that is largely due to the influence of the lobby. The lobby is an extremely...
You see, like, I would consider this a form of false consciousness, because he's making Israel the cause of the U.S.'s support for Israel, when in reality it's the other way around. By supporting Israel, its colonial outpost in the Middle East, what the U.S. is doing is supporting the interest of U.S. imperialism. So this is, again, where some of these liberal frameworks completely miss the mark, or get to the mark and then turn it around, see it upside down, because they don't have the analysis that's rooted in political economy and in an analysis of imperialism. If you have an analysis rooted in imperialism, it's not the Israeli lobby that governs the U.S. or whatever. Yes, the Israeli lobby has an influence, but what creates the conditions for the possibility of the Israeli lobby? That's that's a fancy Kantian way of asking the question: where does the Israeli lobby and Israel itself arise from? It's a colonial outpost of Western, now US-led imperialism. So he's got it somewhat flipped around.
Really powerful interest group. Now, it's very important to understand that the American political system is set up in ways that allow interest groups of all sorts to wield great influence. So in the United States, you have an interest group or a lobby like the National Rifle Association that makes it well nigh impossible to get gun control.
What if I told you that there's a country where small groups of very rich people give money to the tunes of tens and sometimes hundreds of millions to politicians so that policies that favor those groups, even when they're deeply antagonistic to the general populace, are implemented? What would you call that? I think most people would very clearly call that corruption, and the system that the political system, how it functions, they would call that an oligarchy. But no, that's the U.S. In the U.S., we call it lobbyism, and the political system, we call it democracy, liberal democracy. It's absurd. It's a turning of reality upside down in order to allow that reality to continue to reproduce itself.
Control, right? And so with the Israel lobby, you have this group of individuals and organizations that wield enormous influence on U.S. policy toward the Middle East. And this is not surprising given the nature of the American political system. So our argument is that the lobby is not doing anything that's illegal or illicit or immoral or unethical. It's just a good old-fashioned American interest group. And it just happens to be extremely powerful. And our argument is that this is not good for the United States because no two countries have the same interests all the time. And when our interests conflict with Israel's interests, we should be able to do what we think is in our national interest, in America's national interest. But the lobby tends to conflate.
One of the things he's doing here is speaking about our interests in a very abstract way. If when you think about American interests, you think about the interests of the American people, then literally fucking nothing the American government does represents American interests, right? So then when you take it to the relationship that the U.S. has with Israel, it becomes very clear that it's not in our interest. But when we speak about American interests in this way, should it be the interest of the American people that we assume is behind things? No. There's a specific interest within America, the interest of the elite, that keep us exploited, oppressed, poor, alienated, depressed, stressed, traumatized. It's that group of people whose interests are aligned with Israel simply because Israel as an entity cannot be separated from this group of people that are the personifications of capitalist imperialism. Even, Netanyahu, where did he grow up? What country? What schools did he go to? Who was he constantly rubbing elbows with? That's the case for the vast majority of Israeli politicians. So,
America's national interest with Israel's national interest and wants the United States to support Israel no matter what. We also argue, and I cannot emphasize this enough given what's going on in the world today, that the lobby's effects, the lobby has not been pushing policies that are in Israel's interest. So our argument is that the lobby pushes policies that are not in America's interest or not in Israel's interest. Now you're saying to yourself, what exactly does he mean by that? What every president since Jimmy Carter has tried to do, as I said before, is to foster a two-state solution, to push Israel, which is the dominant player in Greater Israel, push Israel to accept the two-state solution. And we have run into huge resistance from the lobby whenever we tried to, let's be blunt about it, coerce Israel, right? In a perfect world where there was no lobby and an American president was free to put pressure on Israel, to coerce Israel, I believe we would have gone a long way towards getting two-state solution. And I believe this would have been in Israel's interest.
That's not true. It's been shown that as soon as any U.S. president says, yo, chill out, Israel just follows what the U.S. says. That's something that is empirically confirmable. There's a direct correlation between when the US gives the thumbs down to something Israel is doing and when it stops. That's why it's so important to get our government to pressure Israel into a ceasefire, because the people that call the shots are here. It's the US that funds and equips Israel with the weapons that are carrying forth a genocide. So if you want to snip Israel as a settler colonial proxy of imperialism, you have to snip it at the root. And the root of Israel is the US and the US imperialist system. It's the bastard baby of Western imperialism, as Kwame Ture was fond of saying.
But we couldn't get a two-state solution because it was almost impossible to put meaningful pressure on Israel because of the lobby. So this was not in Israel's interest, and it was not in America's interest. And that was the argument that we made. And we, of course, got huge pushback for making that argument.
What's the underlying motivation of the lobby? Is it religious in nature? Is it similar to the way war hawks are sort of militaristic in nature? Is it nationalistic in nature? What's if you were to describe this loose coalition of people, what would you say is their motivation?
Well, first of all, I think you have to distinguish between Jews and Christians. You want to remember that there are a huge number of Christians.
It's crazy because Lex Freeman visited, I can't remember if it was Gaza or the West Bank. And he did some helpful videos from there. He allowed a few Palestinian people to speak their mind, and was seen by millions of folks. So you would think that he'd be capable of making some of these connections, like, oh yeah, what I saw were people living in an apartheid state in what has been described by folks in the UN and within the higher-ups of Israel as an open-air prison, what some have described as a concentration camp. You would think that he'd be understanding of an event like October 7th. Like, what the fuck else would you do if you were living in a concentration camp and every peaceful attempt you've had to change your condition has been squashed, people have been murdered, injured? Every peaceful attempt, the same path that Hamas was able to break through on October 7th, there was a march there in 2019, I believe. Hundreds of people were shot, many killed. So when that peaceful route fails, what else do? You just lay down and give up and submit and let yourself be the subjects that are destroyed every time Israel periodically mows the lawn, as it's fond of saying? No, you grab arms and you fight by the only means that the occupying colonial force has left you to achieve freedom. So if Lex saw those conditions, and I can't remember whether he traveled to Gaza or the West Bank, you would think that he'd be able to put two and two together, especially as he fancies himself as this very smart nerd guy. But no, he doesn't. And you see it in the way that he asks Mersheimer these questions.
Zionists who are deeply committed to Israel no matter what, right? And then there are a large number of Jews. The Jews are obviously the most important.
Thank you so much, Cordy, for the $2.79 Canadian dollar super chat. They always speak English at the UN, not Hebrew. Yeah, absolutely. And because you know who they're speaking to. You know, they're speaking to their parent. If your parent only spoke Spanish, as mine do I go up to them and speak in English? No, if I want to be a good son, I speak to them in Spanish. And that's, of course, what Israel does. And a lot of the propaganda, you understand that is so tailored to the U.S. because, like the one that they did when they were pretending to give aid to Gaza, where they put in front of a bunch of empty boxes, in big, bold English, they put medical supplies or medical aid. Forget what it was specifically that they put. Who's that for? Who is that propaganda aimed at convincing? Well, the only people whose consent is absolutely fundamental for them to continue carry on their activities, which is the American public. So, but thank you so much for the super chat.
Of those two groups in the Israel lobby. But, one of the arguments that we made in the book is that you should not call it the Jewish lobby because it's not populated just by Jews, and Christian Zionists are an important part of that lobby. But furthermore, there are a good number of Jews who are opposed to the lobby and the policies that the lobby purveys. And there are a number of Jews who are prominent anti-Zionists, right? So, and they're obviously not in the lobby. Or if you take a group like Jewish Voice for Peace, right? Jewish Voice for Peace is not in the lobby. So it's wrong to call it a Jewish lobby. But with regard to the American Jews who are in that lobby, I think that really this is all about nationalism. It's not so much religion. Many of those Jews who are influential in the lobby are not religious in any meaningful sense of that term, but they self-identify as Jewish in the sense that they feel they're part of a Jewish nation. And that in addition to being an American, right, they are part of this tribe, this nation called Jews, and that they have a responsibility to push the United States in ways that support the Jewish state. So I think that's what drives most, if not almost all the Jews. This is not to say there's not a religious dimension for some of them, but I think that the main connection is much more tribal in nature.
So I had a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu, and he said fundamentally, if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. So the Zionist project is tied to the hip to the Jewish project. What
Oh, here's another big mistake. It's what he's saying is true. It's not a religious issue in the sense that, yeah, some of the most ardent anti-Zionists and some of the first deeply anti-Zionist folks were the Orthodox Jews. He's absolutely right about that. He's wrong to claim that it is this tribal national thing. No, it's not nationalism that's driving this. The sort of Jewish nationalism is the justification for the real drives, which are rooted in political economy, in the geopolitical role that Israel plays as a colonial outpost of U.S. imperialism. It's that simple. That's why Israel was created, and that's what Israel has always functioned as. The Jewish nationalism that he's describing is just the mask that's put on in order to justify the real reasons why they're doing what they're doing.
do you have to say to that?
Look, you can define anti-Semitism any way you want, right? And you can define anti-Semitism to incorporate anti-Zionism. And I think we have reached the point where anti-Semitism is identified today, not just with anti-Zionism, but with criticism of Israel. If you criticize Israel, some people will say, you're an anti-Semite. And if that's your definition of anti-Semitism, it's taken.
And we just talked about this. There was a vote in the House attempting to systematize this equating of critiques of Zionism and Israel with anti-Semitism. Everyone, with the exception of one Republican from Kentucky, Thomas Massey, everyone voted in favor of it, with the exception of Thomas Massey that voted against it, and Rashida Tlaib that very cowardly voted present. So they're trying to institutionalize this ideological trick that has always been present, which is the equating of critiques of the imperialist fascistic state of Israel with anti-Semitism.
An important term, and stretched it to the point where it's meaningless, right? So when Steve and I wrote the book, wrote the article and then wrote the book, all sorts of people said that we were anti.
By the way, if that thing they voted on passes, that means that everything we're doing and everything that students are doing in colleges and people are doing in the streets, it will be considered hate speech, which means that we can be repressed, we can be attacked, we can be incarcerated, because criticizing Israel and Zionism and its genocidal war against the Palestinians will be equated with you being anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish.
Semites. This is a ludicrous charge, but what they meant was you're criticizing the lobby, you're criticizing Israel, and therefore you're an anti-Semite. Okay, if that's what an anti-Semite is, somebody who criticizes Israel, probably half the Jewish community, if not more in the United States, is anti-Semitic. And of course, you get into all these crazy games where people are calling Jews self-hating Jews and anti-Semites because they're critical of Israel. But even people who are anti-Zionist, I don't think they're anti-Semitic at all. You can argue they're misguided. That's fine. But many of these people are Jewish and proud of the fact that they're Jewish. They just don't believe that nationalism and Jewish nationalism is a force that should be applauded. And you want to understand that in the American context, there is a rich tradition of anti-Zionism, right? And these were not people who were anti-Semites, if you go back to the 30s, 40s, 50s. And the same thing was even true in Europe. There were all sorts of European Jews who were opposed to Zionism. Were they anti-Semites? I don't think so. But we've gotten to the point now where people are so interested in stopping any criticism of Israel that they wield this weapon of calling people anti-Semites so loosely that the term has kind of lost meaning. So I think Netanyahu is wrong-headed to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
Alan Dershowitz was one of the people that called you specifically anti-Semitic. So just looking at the space of discourse, where's the slither of hope for healthy discourse about U.S. relationships with Israel between you and Alan Dershowitz and others like him?
Well, I think until there is a settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's no hope of putting an end to this nonsense, right?
So these are just uses of terms to kind of cheat your way through the discourse.
It's
shortcut.
No, it's to silence people. Right? It's very, very important to understand that one of the lobby's principal goals is to make sure we don't have an open discourse, a freewheeling discourse about Israel, because they understand, people in the lobby understand that if you have an open discourse, Israel will end up looking very bad. Right. You don't want to talk about the occupation. You don't want to talk about how Israel was created. Right. All these subjects are ones that will cause problems for Israel. See, just to go to the present crisis. Okay. When you have a disaster, and what happened on October 7th is a disaster. One of the first things that happens is that people begin to ask the question, how did this happen? Right? What's the root cause of this problem? This is a disaster. We have to understand what caused it so that we can work to make sure it doesn't happen again. So we work to shut it down and then make sure it doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. But once you start talking about the root causes, right, you end up talking about how Israel was created, right? And that means telling a story that is not pretty about how the Zionists conquered Palestine. And number two, it means talking about the occupation. Right. It's not like Hamas attacked on October 7th because there were just a bunch of anti-Semites who hated Jews and wanted to kill Jews. This is not, Nazi Germany. Right. This is directly related to the occupation and to what was going on inside of Gaza. And it's not in Israel's interest or the lobby's interest to have an open discourse about what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinians since, I would say, roughly 1903, when the second Aliyah came to Israel or came to what was then Palestine. Right. You want to talk about that. And we don't want to talk about, from the lobby's point of view, the influence that the lobby has, right?
Here he's absolutely correct. Any person that asks themselves that question, which is the vast majority of people, you hear the narrative of what happened on October 7th, you're shocked, you're like, how did this happen? The how naturally leads you to investigating, and it doesn't take much investigation to see what Mersheimer, I'm still troubled by the pronunciation. Mersheimer is saying, which is that what happened on October 7th is a direct effect. It's a production of the last 70-some years of occupation, apartheid. It's the natural effect. It was bound to happen. So it's that's why discourse needs to be censored. So that people do not see the truth of the factors that led to the fact of October 7th.
It's better from the lobby's point of view if most Americans think that American support of Israel is just done for all the right moral and strategic reasons, not because of the lobby. And when John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt come along and say, you have to understand that this special relationship is due in large part to the lobby's influence, that is not an argument that people in the lobby want to hear. So the point is, you have to go to great lengths for all these reasons. You have to go to great lengths to silence people like me and Steve Walt. And one of the ways to do that is to call us anti-Semites. I think the chapter or the section of the book where we talk about this charge of anti-Semitism is called The Great Silencer. That's what we call the charge of anti-Semitism, the Great Silencer. Who wants to be called an anti-Semite, especially in the wake of the Holocaust? Do I want to be called an anti-Semite? Oh my God, no. So it's very effective. But it is important to talk about these issues, in my humble opinion. And I think if we had talked about these issues way back when, it would have gone a long way towards, maybe getting a two-state solution, which I think was the best.
We can't talk about these issues because in order for all of these political agendas to become actual and to continue being in place, the people need to be convinced. You need consent. It doesn't matter how fascistic or totalitarian a state is. It cannot survive on the basis of coercion. You always need a certain level of consent. And consenting to this issue would mean a few things. Either convincing people of the narrative that you built, and if you can't do that, eliminating the possibility of any of those people encountering an alternative way of thinking about the events in front of them. Censorship is a central component for sustaining hegemony, for sustaining the consent of the masses, of the mass of people. And it intensifies in those moments where that consent is dwindling, where people are not accepting the dominant narrative and are opening themselves up to alternative ways of thinking about events, and if it gets even deeper than that, alternative ways of thinking about the world itself, alternative worldviews. So when you see censorship intensify, as we are seeing in our era, you know that that is the ruling class assuring themselves that even if less people buy into their narrative, at the very least, they won't find the contrary. Because they're okay with empty critique. That's why they love the Western Marxists. They allow Zizek to go up on a stage and debate Peterson as a representative of Marxism. They love, teaching the Frankfurt School and the French theory and the academy. Why? Because it's a form of empty critique. It paradoxically does that thing. Hegel said every negative always has a positive. Yeah, but the positive of this critique is the reaffirmation of that thing being critiqued, precisely because the critique provides no alternative. And so when you just critique, but then literally every other alternative in the world that's presented to the thing that you're critiquing, to the capitalist system, whether it's socialist countries or countries that are not socialist but outside of the sphere of influence of empire, you condemn. Of course, the ruling class is going to be perfectly fine with allowing you to speak as much as possible. Your critique is empty. It has no positive content. It has nothing that it points to as an alternative.
Alternative here.
It's complicated, and I wonder if you can comment on the complexity of this, because criticizing Israel and criticizing the lobby can, for a lot of people, be a dog whistle for sort of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. That this idea that Jews run everything, run the world, or this kind of cabal, and it's also very true that people who are legitimately anti-Semitic are also critics of Israel in the same kind of way. And so it's such a complicated landscape in which to have discussions, because even people like David Duke, who are racist, don't sound racist on the surface. Well, I haven't listened to him enough, but there's dog whistles. It's a complicated space in which to have discussions, because I wonder if you can sort of speak to that, because there's
if there's something that I would let pass from the Frankfurt School, it's specifically the chapter on the culture industry from Dialectics of Enlightenment, because I do think that analysis is true. But again, where's the positive content? Here's the socialist alternative. Here's how we see it in socialist countries constructing their new societies, riddled still by contradictions, produced by the pressures of imperialism. That's what's missing. But some of the analysis on the culture industry, I do appreciate.
This silencing effect of calling everybody anti-Semitic, but it's also true that there is anti-Semitism in the world. there is a sizable population of people that hate Jews. There's probably a sizable population of people who hate Muslims too. But a
lot of hate out there.
A lot of hate out there. But the hatred of Jews has like a long history, and so you have Rolling Stones have a set of great hits, and there's just a set of great hits of the ways conspiracy theories you can make up about the Jews that are used as part of the hatred. So there's like nice templates for that, and I just wonder if you can comment on operating as a historian, as an analyst, as a strategic thinker in this kind of space.
Yeah, we obviously, when we wrote the article, which we did before the book, gave this subject a great deal of thought. I mean, what you say just now is music to our ears. I'm talking about me and Steve. I mean, I think that your point about dog whistles is correct. Look, we went to great lengths to make it clear that this is not a cabal. It's not conspiracy. And in fact, in a very important way, the lobby operates out in the open, right? They brag about their power. Right. And this was true before we wrote the article. Right. And we said in the article and the book, and you heard me say it here. First of all, it's not a Jewish lobby. Right. Secondly, it's not a cabal. Right. It's an American interest group. And
the American system is designed such that interest groups are perfectly legal, and some of them are super effective.
Exactly. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly right. And, and it was.
Again, that's where they're wrong, or at least one-sided, because it's not the case that the Israeli interest group is the root of the American policy with relationship to Israel. The opposite is the case. It's the need of the U.S. empire to have something like Israel in the Middle East that Biden has repeated over and over again. If there wasn't an Israel, we would have to create one. It's that need that creates Israel and then reciprocally creates the entity of AIPAC and the Israel lobby that influences more immediately and directly specific politicians and political institutions.
Nothing that we said that was anti-Semitic by any reasonable definition of that term. And, huge numbers of Jews have known me and Steve over the years, and nobody ever said that we were anti-Semitic before March 2006 when the article appeared, because we're not anti-Semitic. But look, you've got this interest group, right, that has a significant influence on American policy and on Israeli policy. And you want to talk about it. It's just important to talk about it. It's important for Jews, right, in the United States, for Jews in Israel, to talk about this. The idea that you want to silence critics is not a smart way to go about doing business, in my opinion. If we were wrong, if Steve and I were so wrong and our arguments were so foul, they could have easily exposed those arguments. They could have gone into combat with us in terms of the marketplace of ideas and easily knocked us down. The problem was that our arguments were quite powerful. And instead of engaging us and defeating our arguments, they wanted to silence us. And this is not good, right? It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the United States. And I would argue in the end, if anything, it's going to foster anti-Semitism. I think you don't want to run around telling people that they can't talk about Israel without being called an anti-Semite. It's just not, it's not healthy in terms of the issue that you're raising, right? But I still agree with you that it is a tricky issue. I don't want to make light of that. I know that there's this piece of literature out there called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I fully understand that if you're not careful, you can come close to writing volume 2 of the protocol. But I don't believe that we wrote anything that was even close to that. And again, I think that a healthy debate on the issues that we were raising would have been not only in America's interest, but it would have been in Israel's interest.
There you go. Somewhat sensible, liberal view of the current state of affairs, still forced to admit some of the central facts of the ongoing occupation and apartheid state that the Palestinian people live under, a condition described by the UN and Human Rights Group as an open-air prison, described by some as a concentration camp, some in the Israeli government themselves, and a general state that has been called by the United Nations, Human Rights, forget what the organization, Human Rights Association, or and other various human rights international organizations as apartheid. So once you have those facts, what else do you need? So that was the last Palestine segment of the day. Now we have the final segment of the day. Let's see. Red Rebel Dragon, Midwestern Mark's recent show with Radica Decide, Noah and Carlos was fantastic. Watch it twice. Thank you so much, comrade. Yeah, Radica is a she's got a wealth of knowledge. She's extremely brilliant, and it's an honor to have her as a friend of the institute and as a somewhat personal friend as well. We'll be doing a panel. Actually, let me see if I can pull up the advertisement for it. I think the Critical Theory Workshop posted it. Here it is. Let me pull it up. We will be collaborating on a panel called The Fateful Divorce of Intellectuals and Working People, which will feature Gabriel Rockhill, Glenn Dyson, Radica Desai, Noah Krashevik, and myself as speakers. It's going to be Sunday, December 10th. This is a typo. It's supposed to say 10th. And we're going to be exploring the divide between the intelligentsia, the PMC, the role that they play within the left, and then working people and the working class. So make sure to tune in. If you haven't already, make sure to like and retweet this tweet from the Critical Theory Workshop. Let me put it in the chat before we go into our next segment, which is a video from More Perfect Union, a group that does very good things, very good work on the condition of working class people and working class struggles in the U.S. They premised the video by saying one billionaire couple owns almost all the water in California. In 1994, the Resnicks secretly seized control of California's public water supply. Now they've built a business empire by selling it back to the rest of us. So just a little more of the heinous sort of things that you find in this evil capitalist system. But let's give this a watch.
While 40 million Californians suffer through unprecedented drought, one billionaire couple owns a massive share of the state's water system, seized in a series of secretive meetings 2 decades ago. That system was largely paid for by the very taxpayers whose water these billionaires hold hostage. Urban water systems are desperate for water, but
socialize the investment, privatize the earnings. That's the go-to. Thank you so much, Ross, for the 10 euro super chat. Solidarity with you, brother. Ross is the Institute's official sugar daddy. For those that don't know, he's our Soros. So thank you so much, Ross. Thank you.
in 2023, they'll receive just 5% of what they requested from the state. The Resnicks are the biggest farmers in California. As of 2007, they owned 4 San Francisco's worth of farmland, and nearly half of Americans buy at least one of their products. Their pistachios, their pomegranate juice, their mandarins, their flowers. It's all under one massive umbrella, the Wonderful Company, a privately owned company worth at least $5 billion.
Those pistachios are expensive as fuck. That's like a $10, $12 bag of pistachios. Those are like, I can buy them twice a year, maybe. But let's keep it going.
The majority owners, the Resnicks, are worth at least $8 billion. How were they able to take over such a large percentage of what should be a shared public resource? This is The Classroom from More Perfect Union, and today we're looking at how the Resnicks got rich. Linda is a former child actress, the daughter of Jack Harris, a successful movie distributor of the 1950s, most well known for The Blob.
Starring Steve McQueen and a cast of exciting young people.
At 19, she founded her own advertising agency. Stewart was born to a middle-class New Jersey family and started his first business.
QWERTY says privatization of the most vital resource to human survival. Definitely nothing dystopian about that. Capitalism is the best. Yes, capitalism rules. I love it when a billionaire family controls all of the water of a state and is able to control basically the survival capacity of tens of millions of people. It's a wonderful, rational system. Actually, don't you want to call it democracy? Isn't that the most democratic system we can come up with? The one where one billionaire family controls the water of tens of millions. It's a very democratic and equal and free. It's a fucking free system. Why would you limit my freedom to control the water of tens of millions of people, you dirty socialist? What the hell's wrong with you? Freedom, baby!
A janitorial service in grad school. He eventually acquired American Protection Services, a burglar alarm and security company. Linda approached him about marketing services for the company, and they hit it off, not knowing that one day they'd work together to take over California's water. The lovebirds became business partners. They bought Teleflora, the flower delivery company, and the Franklin Mint, purveyors of inane little tchotchkes. Linda was the marketing person, and Stewart was in charge of business. As Linda told the LA Times in 1993, "I've always said that Stewart and I together make one perfect person, like little salt and pepper shakers." In the late 80s, they found their primary industry, agriculture. They got into the pistachio business. Linda said, "We've done more for the pistachio than anyone ever since it was planted in the Garden of Eden. My husband should be canonized for all the work he's done." They started branching into other products, almonds, pomegranates, citrus, wine, and acquiring more and more land to cover it, including some very important land in Kern County, which granted them water rights in the area. As the Resnicks were building their empire, the state of California was building new water infrastructure with taxpayer money. California's natural water supply is very inconsistent. Vastly differing amounts of rainfall means the state can go from surplus to drought and back very easily. So they build water banks to store water during surpluses to have during droughts. One important storage facility is the Kern Water Bank, started in 1988. The facility was built with hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars, which could have been a good thing. The people of California would have owned the water. But there were two Californians thirstier than the rest, and they wanted more water. Linda and Stewart Resnick, and they had a lot of political power. We'll get to that. In 1994, state water officials, water infrastructure contractors, and agricultural landowners with water rights arranged a secretive meeting at a resort in Monterey Bay, California. These groups, a mix of private companies and public agencies, rewrote California's water rules without any input from voters, taxpayers, or legislators. The new rules, called the Monterey Plus Agreement or the Monterey Amendments, were devastating for working Californians, and great for agriculture billionaires.
I mean, what clearer example do you want? Confirming the Marxist historical materialist analysis of the world, which says that in every case, the society who holds in its hands economic power, the economically dominant class, in every society, the economically dominant class is at the same time the class that rules over all other social institutions, political, judicial, ideological, religious, etc. All other social institutions become various instruments to help reproduce the order that keeps that specific economically dominant class in power. And who is literally crafting these policies in California? Well, the fucking people that control the water and that control a whole load of other things. It's the capitalist class, the people who own capital, who are the main source from where everything else originates in society. You want to understand politics, you have to understand the interests of the capitalist class. You want to understand our laws, you have to understand the capitalist relations of production. You want to understand what's taught in schools, what philosophy becomes dominant, what new religion people are beginning to adhere to. You have to understand the capitalist relations of production and how those ideas allow for the reproduction, the smooth reproduction of those social relations, of those forms of intercourse. That's it. It's the when you present this to people, it becomes evident that it's the most common sense approach at understanding the world, and the one that would yield the most fruit. American people have a saying which is follow the money. What does that saying imply? Follow the economic motives behind things. It's a historical materialist saying. Whenever your friend and your coworker says just follow the money, tell them, that's a good Marxist saying. You're saying that it's the economic motives, the interest at the economic at the base of society that determines the rest of the political, juridical, ideological superstructure. Good.
The original code included urban preference, a long-standing rule that in times of drought, the state water board would give urban areas, where people live, access to water supplies before agricultural interests. Monterey axed that. That means that in times of drought.
Yes, QWERTY, but don't you know that the socialists are actually the people that own large numbers of capital and influence the capitalist government? That's what socialism and communism means. So all these people are communists.
The water systems for normal Californians would have to buy water from private companies because they weren't getting it from the state. The new agreement also loosened regulations on paper water. That's water that doesn't necessarily exist anywhere but on paper. The full quantities of water that providers could have, but don't actually need to have. Today, 5 times as much water has been promised and sold as actually exists. And importantly, the meeting changed ownership of the current water bank.
Question here from Brody. Eddie, are there any print versions of previous Midwestern March journals? I'm not Eddie. I'm way too good a wrestler to be compared with Eddie. Don't ever disrespect my name like that. I'm just joking. Yeah, we have the print versions of the second one. We have only the ebook versions of the first one, the one from 2021. And the third one, we're doing still the call for papers until the end of the year, and we'll publish the third one at the beginning of next year.
Once belonged to the state was transferred to a few private water contractors, one of which was Westside Mutual, a wholly owned subsidiary of Wonderful Foods. The wonderful employee who runs Westside, Bill Phillimore, is the chairman of the public organization that manages the Kern Water Bank. Boom, one secret meeting and the Resnicks owned nearly 60% of an important California water resource, built with hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money. The new ownership, combined with the rules on paper and surplus water, meant that during times of drought, the Resnicks could sell Kern water back to the state water systems. They took Californian taxpayers' water and sold it back to them, both literally as the water supply and also to grow expensive food like gourmet pistachios and pomegranate juice. They converted the people.
This is literally just a more elaborate and macro scale version of what you get in Everybody Hates Chris, where they steal your toaster and then you buy it off of them at a discount in the back of a van. That's it. I'm going to steal your shit and then I'm going to sell it back to you. Except this time it's at whatever price they decide because they control it all.
People's water into products many can't afford. And that's just one water bank. The Resnicks also have control of other water boards and have been sued for directing more water towards their properties. So how do they get away with this Chinatown-level chicanery?
Going to be a lot of irate citizens when they find out that they're paying for water that they're not going to get.
With philanthropy. The Resnicks donate millions of dollars to politicians and research institutions, which help them secure control over water systems, and even get more water and more taxpayer funding. One important project is the proposed California Delta Tunnel, a taxpayer-funded project which would send water from Northern California to Central, where the Resnicks farms are. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on state and federal legislation and politicians who support the tunnel project. But their favorite politician is Senator Dianne Feinstein.
You come in here and you say it has to be my way or the highway.
Chair of the Energy and Water Subcommittee. She's a close personal friend of the Resnicks, attending their holiday parties in Aspen and maintaining their financial interests. A quick look through the bills she's sponsored shows several which would direct money to Kern-adjacent water projects. The Resnicks even ask her for things directly. When a pesky study about endangering salmon and shad fisheries threatened the Delta Tunnel, Stewart wrote a letter to Feinstein demanding a new study. She immediately forwarded it to the Obama administration, who agreed to spend $750,000 on a new study. It returned the same results as the first one. Can't buy science. But the Resnicks have tried. They are among the top donors to the University of California system, with their donations focusing on agricultural and ecological studies. The Resnicks have basically bought entire departments who put out studies on how water systems should be managed and where funding should go. That leads to even more federal and state taxpayer dollars being used to fix up what the Resnicks profit off of. This is all bad for California, even in a capitalistic sense. Agriculture uses 80% of California's water, but only represents 2% of its GDP. The Resnicks' water monopoly is just one way their quest for wealth hurts the rest of us. They allegedly lobby for increased tensions with Iran to keep embargoes on superior Iranian pistachios. Their giant crops lead to monocultures which kill important pollinators. They siphon taxpayer dollars into the company town charter schools they own, set up to train children to work for their farms. And of course, like any company of this size, they exploit their workers. We need to treat water for what it is. A necessary public resource, a human right, and something that shouldn't be owned by anyone, and work towards legislative change that stops people like the Resnicks from stealing it.
Beautifully said by JT Chapman. If you haven't already, make sure to check out the interview we did with him maybe a year ago now, where we talked about how he came to be a socialist, amongst other things. Yeah, these are the natural effects of a system whose bottom line is accumulating capital. And it will destroy, as Marx writes in Capital, Volume 1, its two sources of wealth and value, the laborer and nature. Capitalism is a life-devouring force. It's a cancerous system. It destroys nature and it destroys human life. And it does all of that for the sake of accumulating wealth and resources and capital in the hands of a very small group of people. It's an irrational, deeply irrational system. So more and more people are figuring it out, and all that's required is for those people coming to consciousness. Perhaps not yet at the level that they need to be, but getting there. It's all a process. What's left is these people organizing, realizing that it hasn't always been this way. It is literally impossible for it to always be this way. Everything's in a constant state of flux. We're good students of Heraclitus. And that the way that it changes for the better, so that we can get socialism and not barbarism, is if we organize together and transform it and create a society that works for the people, that produces in a way that is harmonious with the metabolisms of nature, create an ecological, highly developed civilization. That's something akin to what China's doing, where they've been able to combine development of the forces of production with environmental sustainability. They overcome that fake binary of degrowth or growth, degrowth for nature or growth that destroys nature. No, we can have growth that is efficient and that doesn't destroy nature. We can only have all of those things with socialism. So, okay, let me see. We have some comments here. Let me answer this one first. Tom is doing fine. We're going to be doing a launch event for his book, Frederick Engels. His book on Frederick Engels, G.W.F. Hegel, and Ludwig Feuerbach, which is an analysis of Engels' pamphlet on Feuerbach. He's got like 3 books that are basically ready to be published, but we'd like to publish at least one non-Tom person in between. So the next book that we have set in store is Yanis Iqbal's book, forgetting the title, excuse me. It's been a long night, but it's on neoliberalism and education. It's a wonderful text that hopefully we could speak a little bit more about within the coming weeks when we publish it. Then we'll have another Tom book. Then we'll have Noah's pamphlet, another Tom book, and like that. Because we have a bunch of manuscripts that we're working with, and we have like 4 of them that are from Tom. And we know he's 82 years old, so we want to get those out as consistently as we can. Thank you, Thomas. If you don't mind, send me an email to the Institute's email, midwesternmarks@gmail.com. I see that I'm freezing. Am I freezing? Okay, I think I'm back. But send me an email with if anyone wants to recommend stuff to react to, just email it to us and we'll check it out. Thank you so much, Andrew Ray, for the $5 super chat. Again, People's Funded Institute, we literally could not do a fraction of the things we're doing without your donations that we appreciate very, very much. We know all of you are working people, exploited, and so when you can shoot some coins our way, we definitely appreciate that. And just know that it's always invested in the cause for socialism. So have you covered the arrest of the Communist Party of Great Britain Marxist-Leninist Ranjit Brar in London for criticizing Zionism? Yes, we covered it the first day. Me and Danny Shaw did a segment where we looked at the tweet that the Communist Party of Great Britain put out, that Steve Sweeney, put out. We discussed this. One of the things that I'm very disappointed on is that the Morning Star paper, the way that the paper of the other communist party, the older communist party, that seems to have unfortunately fallen down similar routes as other parties that we know. But let me see if I can find it. And I think it was Steve Sweeney who shared it. But it was a quote like condemning Hamas in a very liberal fashion. Here. Then on October 7, Hamas launched a brutal attack on Israel that has resulted in Israel's ongoing retaliatory war on Gaza. So what? You're gonna, as a communist paper, criticize the defense that a people chose as the only option that they had in order to try to free themselves from 70 years of apartheid and occupation? It's a little strange, but it's great to see that the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, is not taking that approach. So yeah, we covered it last stream, but I wanted to show the interview that George Galloway did in his The Mother of All talk shows with Ranjit. So let's listen in.
As I said earlier, would that you could get that kind of detail if you're the victim of an actual crime in London. But Ranjit got held for 24 hours in jail, got taken off in handcuffs. A surgeon in handcuffs. Dr. Ranjit, tell us what happened and why.
George, it's very good to see you. Thanks for having me back on the show. Well, I went, like many people, George, to express my solidarity with the Palestinian people who, as you are covering, and many people will tell you, are suffering enormously currently since Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, when, of course, the Palestinian people fought back against their occupation, which is not new, but has been a 75-year ongoing massacre, genocide, displacement, forced transfer of the people of Palestine, which we can't go into the full history, but it's important just to say that context, because whenever you see a mainstream media interview, they always start by ignoring that context and asking everyone to condemn Hamas, condemn Palestine, condemn the fight back. I don't do that. But I went to express my solidarity and support because the Gaza, we know Gaza Strip is 2.3 million people, one of the most densely packed civilian areas on the planet. An area, of course, that's so densely packed precisely because they've already been ethnically cleansed once from their homeland of Palestine and put in that open-air prison that is Gaza. And we know that the mass military onslaught against the people of Gaza has resulted in 15,000 deaths and perhaps as many as 5,500 of those children. And I know surgeons, I know people who are working in Palestine and have worked in Palestine. We've all seen a moving testimony, a heart-rending testimony of surgeons operating on children, life after life. They're trying to save in conditions of siege. When the chief of police, the defense minister of Israel, can come on the screen, we've all seen this, and say we're dealing with human animals is what he called them. But it's okay to put them under siege conditions, to take away their water, their fuel, their electricity, their medical supplies, to bomb civilian areas. These are huge mass crimes we're witnessing. But worse, perhaps, even than the crimes of Israel, are the facilitation of those crimes we've seen by the Western mainstream politicians, which in a sense we're used to, but it's never been so starkly illustrated, I think, to the working people of Britain as it is now. And there is huge mass, a discontent, not just amongst, the ethnically Arab or Muslim population, but amongst the whole of the working class population. This is a traditional, a cause that has got huge support from Labour families in Britain, from the working class of Britain, from the white British working class. In addition to the fact that, of course, we have a very, multicultural and multi-ethnic population. So I, like many, I'm not a Muslim, I'm not Palestinian, but I support justice. I'm against terror. I'm against them.
Thank you so much, Jay. They say Carlos about a copy of your book earlier. I'm guessing it's the Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism on Amazon. I hope you get at least some of the share of that. Probably that was about $16. Yeah, we call it Institute Midwestern Marx prices or People's prices because if you looked at like the back end of things, we're really making like maybe $3 a book, sometimes less. And like the ISBN and the making of the book, the amount of work, there's so much work that goes into it. And with the ISBNs alone, that's like $300 that we have to invest as an institute on each book. So we it's unless books sell a lot of copies, it's hardly ever that we've maybe been able to make our money back with like 3-4 of the books we've published. Because of the amount of sales, but what we make from like each one is maybe a couple bucks. So thank you, though, very much for buying a copy of the Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, which you can get a copy of MidwesternMarx.com/books.
murder of civilians. And really, you can't call it anything but a genocide. So I went down, as I did on the 11th today. Today, it seems I've literally just been bailed, not today, of course, it's yesterday, to express my solidarity. I set up a stall, I've got some books. We have books. My father is an author, as it happens. He's written books over a long period of time on this struggle, one imperialism in the Middle East, one specifically called Zionism, and it's subtitled A Racist, Anti-Semitic and Reactionary Tool of Imperialism, which is a mouthful. But really what it does is...
Perfectly labeled book. All things that he said were true. You can't have a state based on the supremacy of a people that are described as God's chosen ones and overlook the fact that that's racist as shit. Because if they're the chosen people, what does that make everyone else if not inferior? Ontologically inferior. So inferior in their very being. That's racism.
It documents the history of Zionism, how Zionism was implanted into Palestine at the time of the Balfour Declaration with the full support of Britain, precisely to use it. And this is not my words. This is the words of the first military governor that Britain installed there. In his own words, his name was Storrs, S-T-O-R-R-S, Storrs. He said, "I'm the first military governor of Palestine since Pontius Pilate." And he said, in his words, that Britain intended to create there in the Middle East a loyal Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. What did he mean by that? He meant that they wanted to create a state which would help them to colonize and loot their newly conquered territories, which of course were divided up in the Sykes-Picot Agreement after the defeat of Turkey, when all of those Arab territories, including of course Iraq, were divided and fell to Britain. And so this state was created and has been committing crimes since its inception. And that's the background. And this booklet really explains that history. It also explains, amongst other things, the fact that because Zionism was an ultra-nationalist ideology which thought actually that Jews were the chosen people, it's a supremacist ideology and it's a racist ideology. But it also thought that Jews could never be accepted in Europe. And it was by no means a mainstream philosophy at the time it was being promulgated. It was a marginal philosophy, but it was of use to British imperialism, and they promoted it with the use of Theodore Herzl and others, and were ultimately successful in promoting it. Interestingly, the only minister of the war cabinet at the time of the Balfour Declaration was someone called Edwin Montagu, famous for the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms later in India, which has its own story, led to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. But he said, that this was a deeply anti-Semitic policy, and he was against it. Despite that, it went forward, and it's led to a state which has constantly committed crimes, particularly from the Nakba in 1948, of occupation, of genocide, of expulsion of the native population, and really setting up an apartheid state, and is currently engaged in really mass war that can only be characterized as genocide. So this is the book. These are historical facts. Actually, the book is a collection of sources, principally of Jewish authors, academics, and even Israeli courts dealing with that, and also the Havara, the transfer agreement. So things which are historically documented facts. But what I've noted, George, and I'm sorry, there's a slight pressure of speech to get some information out, but what I've noted is that really there's a war on this information. We've seen since the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn, the attempt to weaponize anti-Semitism to make Israel, and by extension from Israel, actually British and US imperial policy in the Middle East and elsewhere, immune from criticism. I think seeing Rishi Sunak, seeing Keir Starmer line up in support, justifying the genocide, saying there mustn't be a ceasefire, saying that Israel has the right to defend itself when it's the aggressive party in this whole history and conflict is disgusting. So I've been...
Whenever they ask you that question, ask them, do concentration camp guards have the right to defend themselves? That's the one that Norman Finkelstein asks. Do the slave owners being killed, attacked by Nat Turner, do they have the right to defend themselves? Do the occupational French forces have the right to defend themselves in the face of the anti-colonial struggle of the Algerian people? I think most progressives look back at these events and they're like, oh, great, Nat Turner, John Brown, Algerian anti-colonial struggle, woohoo! Oh my God, look at a figure like, the existentialist, Albert Camus. How silly of him to play the both sidesism game when it's very clear that it's an anti-colonial struggle and that, in that context, everything that the anti-colonial forces did was justified. But a lot of those people that are able to look back and say, yeah, the oppressed were right to fight by any means necessary for their freedoms, are the ones that today want to bring so-called nuance and want to play the both sidesism game. Yes, we condemn Hamas, but we also condemn Israel. No, that sort of attempted neutrality position does not exist. It's a totally asymmetrical battle between an occupational apartheid racist genocidal force and a people literally trying to fucking survive and choosing the only means of struggle that has been afforded to them by the occupiers, which is violent resistance. Remember what Paulo Freire said. Never in the history of humanity have the oppressed been the ones that chose the weapons and violent rebellion on the basis of their own choice when there was possible alternatives on the table. When the oppressed grab the weapons, it is always a result of the fact that it has been the only route left to them to fight for freedom by the oppressors, by the colonizers, by the capitalists, by the exploiters. So don't be fooled into a position where when it happens decades ago or centuries ago, you applaud it, but when it happens in front of your eyes, you condemn it. Don't be, as Eddie would say, a hindsight anti-imperialist. A hindsight supporter of people's struggles. Be a supporter of people's struggles now. When it's difficult. When the propaganda is in full swing. When people are getting fired from their fucking jobs for speaking out against genocide. When the people are actively dying. When one kid dies every 10 minutes because of this fucking Nazi regime. Speak out now. Don't be an ally 10 years down the line when God knows how many thousands and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, hopefully not, Palestinian people have been massacred. Be an ally now. That's what we need of people. But that takes something that not a lot of people have. Not a lot of people have courage. A lot of people are very comfortable in whatever positions they might have, and they don't want to get fired. They don't want the potential future job opportunities that they might have to be soiled because they, God forbid, stood with the people against the force that was trying to eliminate them from the planet.
Been to express solidarity. I was arrested for doing nothing other than having a book expressing those truths. And really, it's those
holding
truths
a book. Holding a book that you didn't even write.
Not even holding it, actually, but being near it on the stall. But first of all, the police were fine. Then it's clear that there's clearly pressure from a political source, because the actual police who you see arrested me, they were very nice, George. They've been talking to me for an hour. They had no problem with me. We were having banter. I was talking to people. Then they were told, "I'm sorry, we have to confiscate the book," and they came to take the book. And I've got a video of that, so I'll post that later. But then they went away, and half an hour later they said, "No, we've got new orders now. We have to arrest you." And it was a slightly surreal thing because nothing had happened. It was literally nothing happened. But quite clearly, we've seen Suella Braverman and David Cameron come out and try and criminalize, say that the marchers who were protesting against the genocide in Gaza are hate marchers, saying that they're anti-Semitic, saying that the police should crack down on them. It's quite evident that at some higher level there was a referral and adjudication process, and the police who had been absolutely friendly and were perfectly decent to me were suddenly ordered to go into this kind of attack mode. And it's an uncomfortable thing to have your liberty taken away, but it doesn't compare in any way to the suffering and the heroism of the Palestinian people who, through no fault of their own, have found themselves on the cutting edge, really, of imperialist onslaught in the Middle East. So really,
and have you been charged? No, of course. But have you been charged? Will this go to court?
So it's a good question. I don't know is the answer. So I've not been charged. When they arrested me, and this time they did arrest me. I've been arrested once before, also outside the Israeli embassy, precisely for a similar attack of Israel on Palestine during their Operation Castlet in 2008. On that occasion, they didn't arrest me. On this occasion, they arrested me. They went through the process. They said that I was in breach of Section 5, and later added Section 18 of the Public Order Act. I didn't know really what it means. It means threatening words and behavior. Then they said it was racially aggravated, and then later on they said it's racial, it's imagery, distributing imagery likely to cause racial hatred. And so I sat with them in an interview. I've explained to them I'm a lifelong campaigner against racism. I'm a lifelong campaigner. Sorry, George, if I lost you. I'm a lifelong campaigner against racism. I'm a lifelong campaigner for equality. But what I'm here to demonstrate against are concrete crimes, which are war crimes, mass transfer of population, civilian population, siege of a civilian population, bombing of hospitals, bombing of schools, bombing of churches, bombing of mosques, genocide against the civilian population. But what's quite clear is that our government are so intent on standing in solidarity and supporting that genocide that they wish to criminalize dissent. They wish to criminalize historical facts and truth in this case. I don't know yet the full repercussions. At the moment, they bailed me. They haven't pressed any charges, but I will have to represent to a police station. Obviously, I will do so. I'm hopeful that they won't actually follow this through and that they will back down. But whatever happens, I won't accept it. I will fight it for as long as I need to, as part of the wider cause of defending the right to free speech in this country and of defending the right of all those who want to stand in solidarity with Palestine to do so. It's not really about me. It's really about the Palestinian people, and it's really about isolating the British people from the knowledge and the feeling that they are justified and have the right to express their opinions on this issue, George.
Dr. Ranjit, we're right behind you. Well done. Thank you.
Oof. Beautifully said by Dr. Ranjit. Hopefully, actually, I'm going to write that down so I don't forget. We're going to reach out to them, see if we can have Comrade Ranjit on to let us know what went down and what has unfolded since at least his interview with Galloway. We previously had Jody Brar on which I believe is his sister, the leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, and of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. Very brilliant leader. And we did a great interview concerning the proxy war against Russia and why the war is one in which the working class has a very clear side. So hopefully we can bring her back on at some point, and also have Ranjit on to speak about what's going on in Britain and his arrest. Thank you so much, Brody Andrew Mulligan, for the $20 super chat. It's tremendously appreciated, brother. As I've mentioned a few times today, but I feel the duty to reiterate it every time. You guys have no idea how important this is for the functioning of the Institute. We wouldn't be able to do maybe a fraction of the work we do had it not been for this grassroots people's funded money that you provide the Institute. So thank you for all the work y'all are doing. I'm sorry for calling you Eddie from Texas. No, man. Eddie's awesome, man. If there's someone I had to trade places with, or if not be killed or something, it'd be Eddie. He's a badass wrestler, someone who's very determined, and has some of the best character traits anyone could have. Whatever he sets his mind to, he accomplishes. And he's a brilliant person, a great orator, and someone who's very in tune with the masses. And the Institute wouldn't be anywhere near to where it is without Eddie's work. So it's an honor to be confused with my brother from another mother. But with that, I've been able to go through the whole stream plan. It's been an extremely enjoyable stream. I've very much appreciated talking with all of you, having the opportunity to just flesh out what I think on these topics and not worry about rambling, because the whole point of doing the stream alone is the freedom of rambling. Add that to the Socialist Bill of Rights, the freedom to ramble on stream. I'm just teasing. So thank you so much to everyone who watched. Thank you to the folks that were capable of donating. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, QWERTY. Thank you, Cade. Thank you again, QWERTY. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Brody. Thank you all for watching, and you might catch more of these alone streams in the future. This was a very enjoyable experience, but we'll go out the same way we always come in and go out, with the glorious, wonderful, and beautiful International. And we'll see you all next time. Peace.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.